Hello, everyone, and welcome to Directors Club. I am your host, Jim Laskowski, and the weather is starting to cool down. The windows are open. My favorite season is upon us, and of course, next month being October of 2020, it's all going to be about horror. But for September, I thought it would be great to talk about a director that is horror adjacent. At least a couple of his films in particular have gone on to be quite renowned, and I certainly could not go it alone because then I would just be monologuing like Eric Bogosian in talk radio. With me today is one incredibly intelligent, articulate podcaster. Please welcome the host of Supporting Characters, returning champion, Bill Ackerman.
Well, thank you for having me back. Is this my first episode with Directors Club since you took over the reins again from?
I believe so.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. This is going to be a tough one. This is a very different filmmaker than all the other ones we've discussed over the years. So hopefully we can do him some justice.
I watched nothing but Larry Clark movies for this episode, so I have to spend the next 2 hours taking a shower.
Yeah.
And praying for redemption. So
hopefully no one's peeping on you with that shower. But
no, hopefully not. Hopefully not. Well, I'm glad you returned.
Yeah.
And looking forward to you doing so in the future. Maybe with Patrick, maybe not. But we'll, hope for the best. I hope that we survive.
I hope so.
For 2021, because I definitely want to keep this going at least for another year, if not longer. But in all seriousness, folks, this is not the Larry Clark episode. It is all about Mr. Robert Clark, a.k.a. Bob Clark. And he's a name that I've known since I was a kid. I mean, obviously I didn't, know about his career, but just due to the fact that I would see his name in the credits for, a yearly staple in our family, watching A Christmas Story. And we're covering two very different works from Bob today, 1974's Deathdream, as well as the groundbreaking successful sex comedy Porky's. So I don't know which film is scarier, but we'll have some great discussions, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, the obvious, popular choice with him is A Christmas Story, which we'll also be talking about. But I thought, maybe that, Porky's might be, I don't know what we'll make of it, but I thought that might be an interesting thing to discuss. And I know that Deathdream was kind of what prompted this episode, so we're definitely going to go deep into that one.
Yes, I highly recommend the Blue Underground Blu-ray.
Yeah, no,
that's a really great release, and I hope people will, make it a priority for for their October viewing. If you haven't seen it yet, I think it's right up there with Black Christmas. So we'll get to both of those, one more than the other. But before we proceed, Bill, how have you been doing during quarantine? Are you getting cabin fever? Are you holding up okay? How are things?
I've been keeping myself busy with podcasts and Blu-ray work and all that good stuff. So I'm a little stir crazy, but still going for my morning runs, every day, and still keep in touch with friends through the internet and occasionally social distanced, socializing. But hanging in there okay. I can't really complain. Feeling very lucky to have retained my job through all of this craziness.
Oh yeah. That's a blessing for sure, because a lot of people are struggling with that. But I like I was telling people before, the idea of lockdown didn't entirely scare me because I spend a lot of my time alone and I've gotten used to it and it's been okay. But it's also one of those things you don't know what you have until it's gone, to where every now and again, I think back to last year for my birthday and the fact that I actually had a little party with 10 people over. I kind of want that again. I want to be able to do that again. I want to be able to hang out with a group of people or go to the movies and sit next to friends or whatever. But I don't think that'll be happening this year. I mean, I'll talk briefly about my experience of seeing Tenet in a movie theater, but again, I can't remember how many seats they normally have at the Music Box, but you know, they did a tremendous job of spacing people out and only allowing 50 people in total.
Yeah, I mean, I just bought my tickets for the New York Film Festival, and this will be the first time I'm going in my kitchen to the movies this year. So it's odd. I miss so much of public life, but that's going to the movies is definitely part of it. I just haven't even felt really tempted by what's even. I mean, there's drive-ins near here, but I just have not had time to even make it up for that, just because I've made myself so busy with the podcast stuff again. But even with that, I miss being able to interview people in person. Because it's hard to develop that rapport with someone you don't really know over the phone or over Skype. It's a lot easier to interview people face to face.
Yeah, you even hung out with Peter Strickland once, didn't you?
I did.
Fairly recently.
Yeah. I guess was it last year? Yeah, in New York when he was here for In Fabric. Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm talking about. And like before everything went down, I had plans to meet up with Alan Moyle and Keith Gordon in person at some point within the year. And once all this went down, I was like, well, there goes that. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And yet recently it was a little bittersweet because the final episode of the new season of Fargo was being filmed blocks away from my apartment, and I could just walk over, and I saw Jesse Buckley there in person. And at the same time, I was like, oh man, Keith Gordon would have been directing this episode if it hadn't been for this pandemic. And maybe, I would have hung out with him in person, like just even if it was just a quick cup of coffee or something.
Yeah.
That would have been so cool to experience. But of course, the whole world has changed and a lot has happened. And even watching them filming, every time they said cut, they had to put all their masks back on. So
yeah, it's. I mean, I know that your old favorite Paul Thomas Anderson has been shooting some scenes for his new film. So I mean, their production has resumed. I mean, my friend Dave Ryder, who does the From the Neighborhood podcast with me, he's back to work on a production down in down south. So I mean, things are creeping back into production. I think Paul Schrader maybe finished his new movie. Like there's things happening, but it'll be a while, I think, before things are quote unquote normal. Honestly, I don't think until there's a vaccine, we'll really see something. I mean, that's my hope, is that once that happens, maybe things can return to something like normal. But
that's what I'm thinking and hoping too. I mean, again, there will be probably red tape behind that, getting access to it and all that. I don't think it'll be instantaneous, where everybody can be like, okay, now there's a vaccine, I can go get one and feel okay right away. So I'm sure there'll be a process after that of waiting. So I'm just trying to be optimistic that things might get back to normal by next year and maybe more towards, late summer, early fall, because, as we know, lots of film festivals happen around that time. And that's always a treat to be able to go see a movie in a movie theater and talk to people about it afterwards in person and stuff. And I'm totally fine doing that, wearing a mask and, as long as it's limited seating and everything. But like most people, I'm opting to just stay home and watch movies in the comfort of my own home.
Well, I just interviewed Jonathan Hertzberg, who works at Kino Lorber and has a new label called Fun City Editions. And he was telling me that he thought that the virtual screenings that his label, Kino Lorber, put in place as soon as the theaters all shuttered, his feeling is that that's going to be maybe a permanent part of distribution going forward, as far as those streaming new releases with they've been including like Q&As, like filmmaker Q&As and such, as like a exclusive kind of lure to get people to watch their new releases in that platform versus maybe Amazon or iTunes or some of the other streaming options. What's great about that is that if you're talking about like an art house release, that might not come to your town. It broadens it so that everybody has access to these things that are not big commercial Hollywood releases, especially at the time when things are very kind of precarious for theatrical exhibition in general, I think. But the downside of that is that that does make that only kind of increases the odds that theaters are not going to have an easy time of it, even when things do return to quote unquote normal. I don't know.
That's what it seems like. And yeah, it's certainly interesting hearing, the fact that most of the critics that I know who would venture to Toronto for their film festival, they're all just staying home and watching online screener links for things. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's a mixed blessing. I mean, again, you don't have to venture out of your home, but at the same time, you miss that sense of community, meeting up with fellow friends and critics and things like that. But at the same time, I feel like I've gotten used to the fact that most of my interaction is this: podcasts, Zoom, maybe the occasional phone call and stuff. But again, you don't know what you have until it's gone in some cases, and I certainly miss being able to at least get together with Patrick once a month, and go to a movie or podcast about a movie. So I just hope that this isn't, because some people like to scare me and say, "Oh, this is going to last for a few years, so get comfy."
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't know if I want to, succumb to that thinking that it could be a few years. Although I think it's possible. But
nobody really knows, and I think that some of that just sounds alarmist to me. I think that, I mean, beyond the fact that so many people are just ignoring the precautions altogether, I think that there's a lot of people that are mindful of those precautions and wearing the masks and socially distancing and quarantining and such, that as soon as they feel like they're not going to contract it or spread the disease, and I think that a vaccine will be that, will indicate that for many people. I think that people are just so desperate for things to return to normal that if it feels even halfway safe, they're going to go for it. I think that some people might always want to avoid crowds going forward for good. This might have traumatized the generation, but I think most people are once they feel like they're not going to die from it, they're not going to kill their their elderly relatives from it, that they're going to resume how things were before. That's my feeling, but I could be wrong.
Well, I hope you're right, even for just the sake of the movie going experience, but also live concerts again. Because I had some tickets this year, and including seeing Greg Dooley for a solo record, and I think I had a VIP pass with that too. So I was finally going to meet him, and yeah, he's somebody I want to talk with at some point in the future. But at the same time, I haven't been as enthusiastic about his solo work or even the last couple of Afghan Wigs records, but I just think he's an incredible songwriter in general. So, and he plus he puts on an amazing live show and always throws in a surprise cover or two.
Yeah. I haven't kept up with Greg Dooley in the last couple of years. He used to be my favorite, for years. I think after the Afghan Wigs reunited, I saw them once or twice, in that new incarnation, and I heard "Due to the Beast," and then I just kind of checked out.
Yeah, and I can understand that. There hasn't been anything that's been on the level of what they've done in the past.
Yeah,
but I'm also curious about a particular screenwriter and our thoughts on his latest work, which we're going to talk about during the What We Watch segment. Coming up right here, right now.
Right here, right now. The man from Laramie and Forrest Gump. Something wild crank. Skyfall sucker punch. Sweet smell of success, rules of the game. A dirty shame. Coffee Wonder Boys, Mama and Bound. I saw the devil big, walking tall. Miracle on 34th Street. But we're never gonna survive unless we watch a lot of movies. Now we're gonna have to talk about what we watched this week.
I always want the guest to go first, and I know we're going to be talking about the new Charlie Kaufman film kind of together for my segment, but is there something that you want to bring up here that people should seek out? I mean, maybe an older title or something that you've seen?
I mean, the only thing that I haven't seen that much this year that I was really crazy about, to be honest with you. I mean, there are certain films I liked that I saw at festivals that have come out this year, like Yourself and Yours, the Hong Sang-soo movie. Like, that's something I'd recommend. And there's a film that is still making the festival rounds called Ask Anybody. That's Evan Purcell's film. That's kind of a like a found footage essay film, kind of using material from gay hardcore films. That is like kind of like a day in the life, like showing the rituals of gay public life, like in an urban setting, like the sexual, like cruising or the docks or gay porno theaters. Like it's using the images of fantasy to kind of document like a certain type of reality. I think I'm not explaining it too well, but that's something I thought was really one of the more compelling films of the year. I think one of my favorite narrative films of the year so far, and it's something you can stream now, and I think the Blu-ray comes out this month, was Abel Ferrara's Tommaso. I don't know if you saw that with Willem Dafoe.
No. Doesn't he have two movies?
He's got three. Because he has The Projectionist, which is a documentary, and then he has a film called Siberia that everybody that I know that has seen Siberia said it's amazing. But Tommaso, I don't know. I mean, Abel Ferrara is interesting to me because he's somebody that comes from like a pure exploitation movie background. Like, he comes from adult films, he comes from horror, he comes from crime films, and then his style seemed to morph into this slightly sleazy art movie territory that was like maybe a little bit too lurid for art houses, but a little bit too introspective to be like straight up genre movies. And I'm thinking like Bad Lieutenant is really where he starts to make that swerve into things that are kind of like in the ballpark of like Scorsese, in that it's like very searching, very like Catholic Italian American kind of concern, but like but they get progressively like more kind of hazy. It's hard to and so the recent kind of reemergence of Ferrara as working full strength with like several films now that like are getting very warm receptions from people I know. It's heartening because he's somebody that I really didn't think would live to this long. I mean, he's somebody that had like a bad very public kind of substance abuse problem. I mean, if you've ever heard the Driller Killer commentary, he sounds like he's kind of nodding off on heroin on it. And his appearances on things like Conan O'Brien, he seems like very kind of off kilter. I don't know how to best describe it, but like, so the recent years, I mean, he's done films like Pasolini and Welcome to New York, and he's somebody that I've always really kind of been fascinated with. And all I'll say about Tommaso, it's like, it feels like a very autobiographical film. Willem Dafoe plays an expat film director with a substance abuse past that is now like living in Rome with a much younger wife and daughter. And again, like kind of like how Ferrara lives now. And it's like his character is like teaching acting classes and just kind of wandering around town, but then like he's kind of slipping in and out of fantasy and also becoming concerned with notions of infidelity with his wife, and then that kind of prompts his own behavior to start slipping a little bit. It's a character study that feels like I mean, it might not be for all tastes. It's definitely like, the introspective, tortured male genius kind of filmmaker. It might be like not to everybody's taste, but I thought it was really quite moving, and one of my favorite Willem Dafoe performances. I think that if you ever like had a passing interest in Abel Ferrara's work, it feels like a major film. Like it feels like very much like a late in the game, like autumnal years kind of like work from a director, like one of those like looking back on a life kind of works. That
maybe like with Scorsese and The Irishman.
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
Like that.
Yeah, like that kind of thing. So that's been one of the only films this year that I was really strongly taken by for new narrative
Yeah,
films.
Ferrara is definitely itching up higher and higher on the list of directors I wouldn't mind covering in the next year or two. Because I'm only familiar really with the run from King of New York to The Addiction. Like I think just that. Well, I know I've seen Ms. 45, and that's great. But like that run in the early 90s, I think was really strong, including his take on Body Snatchers.
Yeah.
But a lot of there's a lot more, including post 90s, that I have no idea about.
He's one of those directors that was famous for like 20 years or so, and then kind of like Peter Greenaway, like the distribution just got really wonky with his stuff. Like it became a case where like there's several films with like big names that have never come out properly here. Like there's one called Mary with Juliette Binoche, one called Go-Go Tales that has a lot of big names in it that they maybe played festivals, but they never really found proper distribution. They never came out on home video or not streaming. You can get imports or bootlegs of things, but it's a weird career. And he's like an outspoken, unpredictable figure. Like he had into a battle with the studio when they wouldn't release Welcome to New York uncut, and so that he wouldn't promote the film, and then Pasolini was like not out here for a couple of years, and then so it's a hard career to totally follow, but and even some of the early films like China Girl aren't quite as available as they used to be. Miss 45 has kind of reemerged as a that's been a cult film for a long time. King of New York, I know, just had like that whole Quentin Tarantino did a whole podcast about his love for King of New York. I mean, certain films stay in the conversation, but there's a lot of buried treasures. He's one of those artists like like Prince that like just was like almost too prolific and like weirdly distributed. So there's like buried gems like scattered if you dig for them. But yeah, he would be an interesting character to cover on Directors Club for sure.
Yeah, and I just looked up Go-Go Tales, and it's inspired by the killing of a Chinese bookie. What? Now I have to see that because that's still my favorite Cassavetes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's as good as that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
That's a high bar for me. It's definitely in my. I think it's in my top 20. I'm sort of revised. That's another thing I'm doing, and for the 10th anniversary of Directors Club, is I'm kind of just revising and going back and looking at my favorite films list and sort of saying, did I really love this one as much as I thought I did? And kind of like bumping up things. I might even have a new number one. I that's kind of up in the air right now.
I'm
not literally up in the air.
I was going to say, that's a good one. But yeah, no. I think, and it's funny because like one of his films you mentioned was The Addiction, and that's a film that would resonate with one of the films we're talking about today as far as the metaphor of vampirism for drug addiction.
Indeed, yeah, and I want another Lily Taylor comeback, because anytime I go back and watch I Shot Andy Warhol, I'm just like, it's a crime that she didn't get at least a nomination for her performance in that.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if she'll get another chance to have a proper star vehicle that really makes use of her talents, because I'm sure you remember as well as I do. I mean, she was the it girl in indie film at one point. I mean, before Parker Posey was, the new queen. Like they always seem to find some new person, but Lily Taylor was maybe the most quirky and interesting, at least in my lifetime, of like the queen of the indies. With I think of things like Girls Town and Dogville. Yeah. Even Arizona Dream. I don't know if you ever saw that with Johnny Depp, the Emer Costa Rica
You know,
film.
I definitely should watch that because that was one. I feel like my dad rented it, and I fell asleep when I first saw it. But if it's like, again, a weird, dreamy, surreal kind of a movie or something, I might appreciate it way more
It's
now.
it's very whimsical and quirky. It's kind of Johnny Depp right before What's Eating Gilbert Grape, that kind of period Johnny Depp. It's got that's where I actually first saw Vincent Gallo. But Jerry Lewis, Faye Dunaway, a lot of big names in it. Yeah, it's a friend of mine just like gave it a 1-star review on Letterboxd, so clearly it's not for all tastes. I knew a girl in college that was her favorite movie, was Arizona Dream. So but Lily Taylor is pretty pretty charismatic in it, and it's actually a pretty good use of Vincent Gallo. I mean, he's doing the same kind of irritated kind of character he does in things like Buffalo 66. It's hard to imagine, I know, but
okay, well, so here we go. 2 films that most cinephiles have been anticipating all year. I've finally seen, and I'm definitely going to have a hard time expressing my thoughts on both, mainly because I didn't quite fully grasp what they're trying to say in the end. And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's bad, and I'm not quite ready to say, like, either one is good or bad. I think it's okay. So let's start. I'm just going to briefly go through Tenet because I don't think I can spoil it because I couldn't comprehend it.
Okay.
And it's not really a movie I think you can spoil necessarily. I mean, there are things that happen obviously where you can, because to me, it's what happens is akin to a Bond movie. It's very conventional, action-packed stuff, only with a Nolan twist in that he's very similar to Linklater, very obsessed with time and its place and what it does to our reality and things like that, and just our perceptions of it. And, I think if Nolan had actually released this on a streaming platform, it would have been great. It would have been a great help for not only an instant rewatch, but to be able to read the subtitles, because a lot of the criticisms people have about Nolan's previous work when it comes to like the overbearing score and sound design, I think are like way more in the forefront for this film. Like I can pretty much comprehend what's going on in all the other Nolan movies, even if I can't hear exactly what words are being spoken. But here it was, I was like, I don't know, man. I think the only way I can watch this is with subtitles for the future. And I don't know if that's good or bad, or if that was like a conscious choice on his part, because I don't know if there's just something with his ears. I don't know if there's something going on there. But, as far as being like awestruck by it, there are moments. I think that there are really cool sequences. I think it's worth seeing. But really, it's just a time travel movie where time is inverted, and you have a bad guy played by Kenneth Branagh who really just wants to destroy the world. And, again, it's just got Bond-like characteristics that, I don't necessarily... I've never been a big Bond guy, to be honest.
Yeah,
and never really, like, got the appeal of all that outside of going, oh, that was cool. He did that cool thing in the movie. That's cool. I enjoy that. And that's kind of what my experience was watching this, was like, there are definitely cool moments. There are definitely things I enjoyed watching. And I'm all about the exploration of time in film. And, that's probably why I'm a Christopher Nolan fan to begin with, because you go all the way back to Memento. What does it open with but a reverse shot of a bullet going into a gun? And I think between the experience of Memento, which I still think is his best film, yet I have a stronger emotional response to Interstellar, and I understand why people don't. I understand why people find that movie to be cold or whatever. They just don't have that response to it, but I do, very much so. Again, it could be just like, father-child things going on in that movie that really just gets to me. But, John David Washington is essentially just James Bond trying to stop someone from destroying the world, and Robert Pattinson joins in on the fun. Elizabeth Debicki is kind of the standout because she's just kind of walks the fine line between being a femme fatale and a damsel in distress. But really, this plot is not that exciting. It's just how he approaches the action sequences and really great camera effects that make it worth your while. But I couldn't follow the motivations of the characters or why certain things were even happening, so it was really hard to have any investment in how things play out. So yeah, like, where do you stand on Nolan in general? Because I again, like, I think there are cool things about this movie, but I don't know if someone who isn't into Nolan would really appreciate it.
I'm not a Nolan person, but I don't. I have friends that hate Christopher Nolan's films, and I don't count myself in that camp either. I kind of I watch each film like interested in seeing, like, I like the idea of Christopher Nolan as far as like a spectacle filmmaker that is also trying to tackle ideas and is not dumbing it down for a mass audience, that is a maybe like a Ridley Scottish kind of figure, maybe like not a natural born entertainer like Spielberg, but not a but somebody that is trying to make mass entertainments that are smart, that are visually like that trade in spectacle. I think for me, I liked Memento a lot when it came out in 2001. I liked Following when I caught up with it on video, which came out on video in the wake of Memento's success. And I've seen everything else. I have not seen Tenet yet, but yeah, I don't really feel strongly about anything he's done since Memento. I don't really hate anything. I watch them, I read the discussions of them, but I've never felt like compelled to rewatch any of them. I think I rewatched The Dark Knight, but even that, the thing I thought about The Dark Knight was just, I was amazed at how right wing it was, but all of my liberal friends loved it because it feels like a film about Dick Cheney's torture techniques being justified to fight terrorism. That's what it feels like. So, I thought that was interesting, and you mentioned the murky sound, and I think it is interesting how it's so hard to make out the dialogue. I mean, I love Robert Altman, and I think that Nolan is definitely the least concerned with clear dialogue as any filmmaker since Altman. But when I watch something like Dunkirk, I can appreciate, like, he's clearly got a knack for visually striking set pieces. Like, I'm thinking of the soldiers under the flaming water. I mean, there's things, striking images. I thought Interstellar, The Prestige, like these, these are attractive looking films. I don't feel like I'm being talked down to by them. But I don't feel like any strong connection with his stories. I think that, when we talk about the Kaufman film, but I'm not really drawn to, I don't dislike puzzle films, but I'm not like, that doesn't excite me to like decode something for film.
Well, you're a fan of Lynch, obviously, and I was talking to, I actually like emailed Brian Tallarico, and I said that about the last act of I'm Thinking of Ending Things. I have this tendency to want to solve the puzzle and figure out, what does this mean? Why is this here? And then his reply was, I don't think you can do that with this movie. And I think that holds true for a lot of Lynch's work. Like, my instinct is to solve the mystery or to figure out, like, the last episode of the last season of Twin Peaks. Why is this happening? What does this mean? What the hell is this? Well, just like a lot of things, like the questions I want answered. But I think even Lynch himself wouldn't say that there are answers, or you have to come up with your own answers, or any number of scenarios where there really isn't a clear answer.
And I mean, I have satisfying interpretations of things like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, as far as what I think is happening. Like, it doesn't feel like, random disconnected scenes. Like, they feel like they have a logic to them. But it's not I mean, that's not the attraction to me, is like, oh, see, isn't that clever? Like, the cleverness of it is not the appeal. It's the emotional impact of Lynch that I respond to, as far as like,
Yeah.
they are either funny or they are sexy or they are scary or they are like, they tap into a kind of dread or feeling. When I look at Christopher Nolan's films, and his films are not as, like overtly challenging as David Lynch, as far as like trying to figure out what's going on, I don't think. But, I can appreciate that he casts charismatic, movie star actors, and his films look nice, and the money's on the screen. Like they feel like big movies that are not superhero movies. I mean, well, the Batman movies are superhero movies, but like I don't know. I mean, I like that he makes films that make so many people happy, and people younger than myself seem to like put him on the as one of the great directors of the working now. I mean, for me, like someone like David Fincher, I think of as like a sleek Hollywood director that does smart commercial entertainments. His work seems to resonate with me more, even though it's not as
I think I would agree
it's not
with
as
that.
full as
Yeah.
like pondering ideas, and but that's fine. I don't, I think yeah. I mean, I don't know. I like and Christopher Nolan is somebody that fought the good fight to preserve celluloid, like with a clout that other directors didn't have, and he clearly who is it? The Quay brothers, like he celebrates certain things that I like. He seems like an intelligent, nice person in interviews. Like I like the idea of Christopher Nolan as a powerful director, but like when Warner Brothers, in the wake of Inherent Vice, said that they weren't really looking to work with directors and give them final cut anymore. And I think they were thinking about Paul Thomas Anderson. But they were going to, make an exception for Nolan and Eastwood. And I just thought, you put Paul Thomas Anderson next to Christopher Nolan, and I just like every single thing that Anderson does, I find just way more interesting than even the best Christopher Nolan films. But it says a lot about the way Hollywood works right now, that they don't really know how to make Anderson films into the kind of big events that a Christopher Nolan film always is.
Well, it's interesting because like I think, and I don't want to even sort of reduce both Charlie Kaufman's latest and Christopher Nolan's latest as bordering on self-parody, but there's a little, I don't know, it almost just seems like he got lost in his own idea, and it didn't I don't know, it didn't just click. And there's a couple of aha moments, but you don't really feel any sort of emotion. And I guess there are people who can watch something like Interstellar too and not feel any emotion. Or the Marion Cotillard stuff in Inception. There are people who can watch that and not feel any emotion and just sort of get caught up in the spectacle of it all. But there are moments in Christopher Nolan's films that I do sense something more than just, oh, this was cool and this is just an awesome, entertaining spectacle. So I definitely, really respond strongly to a couple of Christopher Nolan movies. And with Charlie Kaufman's latest, I'm a little surprised, but I think that's also it also has to do with expectations, because Synecdoche, New York is in my top 5 favorite films, and I have a strong emotional response to that movie. So I think in some regards, I was expecting a little bit more from his latest, to like feel, I don't know. And I think it's just because there are so many questions, and I don't want to say that he got lost in his own ideas to where that nothing seems clear, because I'm sure many people watching this can figure it out what, especially the final act is supposed to say and what it means. I just didn't find it to be that great. Just the final act, really. Like, I actually love and I mentioned Linklater earlier because I was thinking of, Before Midnight, and just like the conversations those two characters are having about life, love, art, all sorts of things. And I like I said, I can watch good actors talking for long stretches of time and not be bored by that. Some people are, but
yeah,
I found the road trip stuff endlessly interesting and compelling. I loved the when they finally get to the farmhouse, I loved all that. And then my mind, and similarly, because I read the book, I turned on it a little bit at the end. So what was your experience with this? Because I want to hear it too.
I liked it. I also share your love for Synecdoche, New York. I didn't feel like this moved me the way that does. I thought I thought it called attention to itself as being kind of taking a chance in having certain poems or certain monologues play out for what feel like long stretches of screen time. I thought I liked the rapport with those actors and like those scenes in the car. It felt like like parts of it feel like almost designed to be performed on stage, which, I guess, I don't know if that's a deliberate choice, given how the film concludes. Talking about puzzles again. And I think that this is a film that is clearly meant to be decoded, and little clues and Easter eggs and all that. And
there's going to be so many YouTube videos, people.
Yeah.
There's going to be so many of those people like, okay, this is what this meant. This is what that meant.
Yeah. And so for it to be some kind of meditation on love and death and time and aging, I think that all of the games that it's playing kind of put me at arm's length with any kind of like maybe the emotional reaction that I think I'm supposed to have. Maybe I'm not supposed to have it. Maybe it's meant to be more of an intellectual thing than an emotional thing. I thought it seemed to almost tread towards horror movie territory when they get to the house and you have the scratches on the door and you have like I read someone compare it to Get Out a little bit in terms of the tone, and I can see that. I've seen it twice and I still feel the same. Like, I liked it. I don't know if I could explain every single thing, but I sort of have a comfortable sense of like what things are supposed to mean, what characters, like, it's funny thinking about like something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and like the idealized woman in that, and like how it's a little bit more complicated as you look closer. It's the same thing here. It's like what seems to be an ideal woman is really more. I don't know if we get into spoilers, but it's more complicated. It's more complicated than would appear on the surface, I guess. But
yeah, I'm okay with because his latest is on Netflix. This is a movie podcast, and I would think that most cinephiles at this point would be very curious and would have watched it. If you haven't for some reason watched it yet, you can pause this episode, fast forward it, go watch it first, because I think it's okay to talk about spoilers. In other words, I just think because it's so widely available now, and I think that's a good thing, because maybe you won't love it on a second viewing, but there are at least things you'll pick up on probably that you may not have noticed, or you'll pay attention to other things on a second viewing that I think are interesting, at least. But like the responses I've heard have been varying, including what my initial response was reading the source material was that you just took your most interesting character and reduced her to being a figment of this man's imagination, the janitor's imagination, I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't think that sits well with me in the end, because once you take Jessie Buckley out of the picture, I think it loses something, and it does become more Kaufman surrealist in ways that I think make sense. And I think definitely they're there not just to be quirky and weird. I think they mean something. I just didn't find as much pleasure out of it. And by the very end, I just kind of went, huh, as opposed to, oh,
Yeah.
Like, oh, you would okay, that's the note you're ending on. It was more like,
Well, the second time
okay.
I saw it with friends that were more well versed with the musical Oklahoma, and so they were drawing all sorts of parallels to the story of that. And I haven't seen Oklahoma since I was in 8th grade, so I I don't really remember it well enough to.
Yeah.
I mean, I did notice when she starts quoting the Pauline Kael review of A Woman Under the Influence. And I'd noticed that it was a Pauline Kael collection of essays for keeps in the bedroom that she finds. So I got that, and I wasn't clear why she was all of a sudden talking like Pauline Kael, other than,
Smoking a cigarette.
well, other than that she's supposed to represent someone who's smarter than him, but also like, the it evokes those kind of relationships where you share your love of something and then your partner just tears it apart. But
Yeah, that happened to me. That happened to me in my last relationship, where I was like, "Oh, that's how you feel about this." But
it happens to everybody. But to have it torn apart in the language of Pauline Kael, I think what that means is that like she's made up of all these things that are in his head, and he's somebody that grew up reading Pauline Kael reviews, so he's using Pauline Kael to tear apart his film through this projection, is how I read that scene. But what that all means, I wasn't sure if the intimations about sissies, or the fact that he's like a drama, like a drama school kind of kid, like if there's a like there, or like the line about homosexuality being something that was thought of as a negative condition with overly mothering kind of figures up until a certain point in history. Like, I don't know if there's like things that are coding it that like he's either closeted or bisexual or gay. And it's not a whole lot that really pays off that interpretation, but those lines create that question mark in my head. Like, is there something I'm not reading correctly in terms of what they're saying about that character's sexuality?
Yeah, I think it keeps everything ambiguous to maybe a fault. In this case, like, I don't mind having questions and lingering on with them. I don't. That's actually part of the fun in some regards, and certainly you have conversations with different people, and you might get a different interpretation. But I know from hearing Q&As with Charlie Kaufman, and he's certainly not going to spell things out. He's more or less, he made a conscious choice to give this figment of this janitor's imagination more agency, in that she can challenge him, or she can basically have a differing opinion, as opposed to just being this ideal lovey-dovey. Almost what I thought of too was a movie that since it came out, I haven't thought of in a long time, is Ruby Sparks,
which I've never seen.
Because in that movie, really, it's about a character who no longer wants to be a manic pixie dream girl. That like she wants to be a fully realized human being, and not just a figment of this writer's imagination.
Yeah, well, the character in the Kaufman film, I mean, she's more our point of identification than the guy that's dreaming her up. And the fact that we hear her questions, we identify with her. So the fact that she's, quote unquote, not real, is kind of a confounding element of it. But I mean, but again, it feels like, part of the game that he's playing, and that's fine. But it is, you can project all sorts of things onto it, because so many things are left unexplained. Even thinking about the ice cream parlor, and there's kind of some mean girls, and then one that has like skin, like a skin condition that is she supposed to represent our male lead character? And the fact that she's a woman, what is that it's saying? Is like the fact that there's a gender swap? Is it saying that there's a trans kind of situation, in terms of like how we're supposed to read that character? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be like 1,000 different theories on it, which is great. But yeah, I mean, watching it twice, I've enjoyed it. I haven't read any reviews of it yet. Weirdly, it seems like a film that would be polarizing. You told me before we started recording that some interpret it as a celebration of incels, which I didn't get.
Well, that I think comes from her final, like when she gets to the high school and meets the janitor, she has this long monologue to him about, because he's asking her, what's your boyfriend look like? And she goes, well, I don't know what he looks like. That's like trying to describe a mosquito that bit me 40 years ago or something. And she talks about this encounter at a bar on trivia night where this guy was just creeping on her. And it's implied that it's supposed to be him, that he's this creepy dude just like staring at her, not really going up to her and talking to her. And she just wanted to get away from this creepy guy. And I guess a lot of people see that as like, well, this janitor is just this lonely, pathetic creep. And there's also this blink if you miss it shot where when they're in the car outside the high school and they're kissing, suddenly you see this insert of the janitor peering in a peephole, almost like in Psycho. And I never interpreted, I didn't really know what that was. I was just like a flash of something. I was like, oh, this is just his mind creeping in all of a sudden and, jarring things up or whatever. But some people thought of it as like he's looking in on the high school girls, just bringing it back to Porky's. But I really didn't see that. And some people are saying that this guy is, pathetic and creepy and weird. Well, I just thought of him as sad and lonely. I mean, to me, it's like he spent most of his life taking care of his parents and not having any romantic connections with anybody. And maybe all he did was just like consume all this pop culture and, and just lived in his bedroom most of his life to where, he never really got out and, had real relationships or anything. So I don't get the whole incel interpretation necessarily, but I'm not dismissing it either.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of incels, I think of anger maybe, or like a bitterness. Yeah. And I didn't really get that tone from it. I mean, maybe there's a bitterness to how the girls at the ice cream shop are represented as like,
yeah, that's another angle.
Overly
sure.
mean, and that you should go order the ice cream because they won't wait on me. They don't like me. Like maybe there's some of that to it, but it's such a small part of the film. I don't know that I thought of it as a celebration of some kind of outsider, like in the way like say like Taxi Driver, something like Taxi Driver, which comes up in those kind of conversations, is a it's complicated because it makes a hero, even an ironic hero, out of somebody that maybe fits a little bit more easily into that kind of bitter, resentful, lonely man thing. I saw this as maybe more kind of contemplative than like angry, but I don't know. I mean, not to say that if that's how it plays for you as a celebration of an incel kind of character, if that's how it plays for you, then that's not wrong. I mean, you have to be able to, find it in the film, but if it reads that way for people, then I don't know. It didn't read that way to me, though.
No, I didn't get that impression. I mean, like when she has that monologue towards the janitor towards the end, and then ultimately, like it seems like she's full of anger that this happened. Like I just wanted to have a nice night with my girlfriend at this bar, and this guy just wouldn't like stop looking at me or start creeping on me, and I just wanted to get away from him. Like she seems very angry at that moment. But then ultimately, what does she do at the very end? She gives him like this pity hug, and that to me felt very confusing. Like it seemed to like jump from emotion to emotion in a way that made me go, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to interpret all of this, especially everything that follows, where it turns into La La Land, and then A Beautiful Mind, and then Oklahoma, and then we have the animated talking pig. And I wouldn't say any of that stuff is bad, but it doesn't involve her point of view or Jessie Buckley at that point. And I kind of tuned out, but at the same time, I'm like, this is Charlie Kaufman. This is not going to be, like Sofia Coppola's interpretation of this material. I think that he's more drawn towards the sad and lonely janitor character. And, ultimately that's also what the book is about. But with both the book and the film, I ultimately not happy with how things play out. I don't dislike it either, though. Like, I think it's an interesting way to go. It's an interesting series of notes to go out on.
I mean, it's a film that I still feel like I'm untangling, and I apologize to any listeners if I'm not like totally articulating, myself very well on this film. But like, I think that, I've seen it. I've seen it twice. I enjoy individual scenes. I like thinking about how they fit together, but I don't know that I have a completely satisfying, like, this is clearly what it all means. I mean, it just feels like a reflection on a life that's been, a reflection on a sad life, and like a character's fantasy. But that also feels like a very limited way of experiencing it, to just be like, oh, I never had a girlfriend. I wish my girlfriend was like this. And, and here's, somebody that will order the ice cream for me, and impress my parents. Even the way that when he visits the parents, and at a certain point, their ages become very fluid. I thought, at that point, I was just going to be like Synecdoche, New York, and about death and aging all of a sudden, because I didn't really get the impression that that's where we were going. I
think that's part of it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly when you get to the frozen lambs, and this is a foreshadowing of the frozen, foreshadowing the ending, I guess. When you get to talking pigs, that kind of like whimsy, or even the musical element, the dance element. I didn't feel like say something like Punch Drunk Love, when that evokes like the musical in a very quirky way. Like, I feel like that puts its heart it wears its heart much more like openly on its sleeve, and I think that with Kaufman, he goes out of his way to make fun of manipulative Hollywood romance, by having the Zemeckis thing. So I know that
who's never made a movie like that. I guess Welcome to Marwen, maybe, but
no, it didn't feel like a Zemeckis film at all to me. It just felt like he is such a hip director to attack because he made Forrest Gump or whatever. I don't know. Like, I mean, it just felt like he's a stand-in for Hollywood schmaltz. But I think that, like, I don't know. I don't even know who would have made that film, like, realistically, like Zach Braff or somebody.
Nancy Myers or Zach Braff, yeah.
But like, I
don't know. Like, I also get the feeling that his philosophy might be, and again, it's kind of cynical, but I also think that Charlie Kaufman might be that, is that all we do is consume all this media, pop culture content, romantic comedies, books, to where it's going to just leave us isolated and depressed because we're not actually engaging with real human beings. So maybe we're all going to get old and die and just be surrounded by our Blu-rays.
I mean, that's definitely a valid reading of it.
I think that makes me angry too, because probably because and this goes back to an episode where Patrick and I are like, why the hell are we even podcasting? What's the point to all this? And my ultimate conclusion to this, to that conversation, to that question was, well, I'm not married and I don't have kids right now. So this is what I'm doing. I have the time to do it. I'm passionate about it, but if I'm someone who just consumes all this media and never finds a life partner, am I essentially just, the janitor? I wouldn't go that far, but I just wonder if maybe this is a cautionary tale too, to some degree. Like, he's saying, if this is all you do, and you lead this lonely life, then you ultimately may just, crumble in your own head and not really ever be happy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does feel like it has a note of self-pity about itself, which I think happens with most Kaufman films, as far as like that third act always feels like a little bit maudlin and introspective, whether it be being John Malkovich or Eternal Sunshine or Synecdoche, New York. I mean, even adaptation is a little different, but I mean, they feel like, they seem to get like too worried about life to even like, move forward like with like a narrative momentum, which I remember that being the complaint about being John Malkovich when it came out in 99, that like it seemed to go for like this kind of melancholy philosophical tone, and people wanted the playful surrealism. But I think that's what makes that film more than just a quirky exercise, that has those that heavy-hearted element to it. But I don't know if it's just he's done this kind of thing before. So
that's what I felt.
But at the same time, I've seen so few films that really stood out to me this year that even if it's a variation on things he's done, it's still
and as a fan of great actors, I mean, it like this ensemble alone to me is pure joy. To like everybody in this is great in different ways, and certainly I'm on board for whatever Jessie Buckley does, because I haven't seen her film from last year, Wild Rose or Beast, and I guess both of those are standouts.
I like Wild Rose, and I liked her in it a lot. So yeah, I didn't even.
Yeah, I mean, I just like this was the movie that made me go, okay, well, I just want to watch everything she does, because I think she has that incredible moment with the poem, and it actually, sort of breaks the fourth wall, and she looks right at the camera. And I kind of went, well, I'm in. Like, I just think that, she's remarkable. I've loved Jesse Plemons since Breaking Bad. And, what can you say about David Thewlis and Toni Collette at this point?
Yeah, it's always nice to see them. And Jesse Plemons, I thought, were you reminded at all of Philip Seymour Hoffman? It felt like he was doing what a younger Philip Seymour Hoffman would have done in that part a little bit.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. And I don't know. I see him going in the Michael Shannon direction too, like just being really good at what he does as a character actor. Like he can play creepy, but he can play nice, sincere too. I imagine that he's gonna continue to go on and do great things for sure. And certainly it made me think too of Philip Seymour Hoffman, because of he has a small role in the Master. And I could see similarities. Like people call him as looking like Matt Damon, and I understand that too. But I see him as like another Philip Seymour Hoffman for the future, to where I'm like, Paul Thomas Anderson, you can feel free to cast Jesse Plemons in your next movie if you want, because I think he would do great things in that.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly associated him with his supporting turn in Game Night, which I thought was which was like the standout character to me in that film. I don't really know Breaking Bad, but I know him from Game Night, and so I thought maybe his appearance plus Kaufman's writing, it just reminded me of Hoffman in Synecdoche, New York. But I could see him being used, with by other filmmakers. It's hard. I don't really have a beat on him yet as far as like a persona. It feels like a character actor to me, so I have no idea like what he will be working on next.
Yeah, well, I can tell you one thing: Jessie Buckley's going to be great on the new season of Fargo. I just know it. I can sense it already based on just watching one scene being filmed. I was like, whoa, that's going to be great if that makes it into the episode. But at the same time, I think she's definitely playing like the Coen brothers, goofy, quirky caricature kind of role as a nurse in this new season. I mean, I really like these seasons of Fargo because they basically play like 10-hour Coen Brothers movies, and there's like a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of lines of dialogue thrown in. Like if you're a Coen Brothers fan, then you know where it's from or something. So I think that's playful in that regard and fun. But each season has its own plot, and it's really weird and interesting. They capture the spirit of the Coen Brothers in like a 10-episode arc with really great performances, including Jesse Plemons, who was in season 2, where he met his future wife, Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah, I haven't watched Fargo. I saw the first episode of it, but I've not. I only hear good things. So one day I'll take that take the plunge.
Yeah, definitely. The seasons get better as they go along too.
Yeah.
So let's do this, Bill. We have a director to talk about. A very, very interesting director that I'm glad we chose. He is Mr. Bob Clark.
Directed by Mr. Clark. I think his first name's Robert or Bob. Directed by Mr. Clark. I think his first name's Robert or Bob. People watching A Christmas Story. Olivia Hussey. Where are the calls coming from? In the house! Deathdream, Dead of Night, Night Walker. Have you seen it? Which title? Never ever watch Loose Cannons. Let's talk Bob Clark.
I'll tell you.
Well, we can talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. So here we are. A director that has the wonderful honor of making Ebert's great movies list and his most hated movies list. Can you guess what's made the great movies list?
Loose Cannons? No, I'm trying to think. Baby Geniuses too. It's obviously A Christmas Story, which is very much an anomaly. Well, yes and no, because that film. Well, I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that film seems to mark a break where he starts moving towards the latter half of his career, which is very concentrated on family films and films for children, which makes them kind of tricky to talk about critically as like a bunch of grown men, because we're not really the target audience for a film like Baby Geniuses.
I don't know if anybody is, but he started out pretty young as a writer. Like I think when he was 12, he wrote a sequel to Gone with the Wind just for fun. But he's kind of gone on to say like he's just a regular Joe when it comes to movie viewing, that he doesn't like, he loves movies, but he doesn't love movies in the way that Tarantino does or De Palma or something, He didn't necessarily seek out to become a director. It just sort of happened.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody that was a high school jock that was and came from like a relatively poor background too. I mean, he was somebody that like his father died when he was a young man. Like he was somebody that kind of, but he's somebody that like went to a couple of different schools, grew up in Fort Lauderdale, like I think from the age of 8, but became interested in arts, in college, writing and directing plays and falling in with a group of like-minded creatives, people like Alan Ormsby and Jeff Gillen that would be like major contributors to the early genre films that make up his 1970s output. His earliest films, would be firmly in that like late 60s exploitation movie kind of camp, like things like the kind of things that Something Weird would distribute. I didn't know that he was the assistant director on a film called Shanty Tramp, which is like this fun little exploitation film. Was someone I interviewed for supporting characters, Lisa Petrucci. That's a film that she really likes a lot. And then the very first film that I'm aware of is a film called The Emperor's New Clothes, which I think is lost now, starring John Carradine. But it's funny because I found local press coverage when that film came out, and it said that he had directed other films, written short stories, even had a book of poetry published. I have no idea if any of that is accurate, because I found a lot of things in interviews with him that were not, to my knowledge, true. So I don't know if
maybe they got mixed up with another Bob Clark,
or he just would say things that, to puff up his resume that might not have been totally accurate. I don't know, but
yeah, he was approached by I think it was after college. He directed a stage production of Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge, and then he was approached by this guy named Charlie Brown, who was
I believe it's Charlie
is
Brown.
it Charlie Brown? Oh, wow.
But spelled like Braun.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe it was just the misspelling here I got, but he was working on a movie called She-Man, and I tried watching it, but I just could not get into it. That bongo score really got on my nerves after a while. But I mean, yeah, you were saying it was made at a time when, like, yeah, these types of films were accepted, and but even Clark himself has dismissed it really as not being his official first feature, that it was just kind of like a job that he did.
She-Man is interesting. I mean, it's he's using a couple of actors who were female impersonators, Leslie Marlowe and Dorian Wayne, drag performers of the early 60s. And I mean, it's the kind of thing when you're dealing with, like, I mean, the plot of that essentially is a bachelor, like a playboy war vet who's just kind of lounging around the pool with girls, but he has an interest in S&M, I think. And then the thing is, he gets contacted by this dominatrix and blackmailed into becoming his female servant. And so he's shaved, given estrogen, put in a little maid's costume, and he kind of grows to like it a little bit. Like, it's a weird scenario. Like, it is, I've heard it described as transploitation, in that it's like the lure for the audience would be seeing men dressed as women. Yeah. So it's speaking to a very specific demographic of the exploitation movie market. It's so quirky that it has a certain appeal to it, and it isn't totally offensive. I mean, even by contemporary standards, it's probably a little bit creaky in places, but it's not like it's not really condescending to transgender type characters.
Yeah, and I didn't get that impression from what I saw.
Yeah,
but I pretty much made it to their meeting.
But the idea of forced feminization, is
mm-hmm.
Provocative one, and then it has God, what am I thinking of? It has like the white coat kind of framing device of like a doctor kind of talking to the audience to like explain the dispositions of the characters. And what I also thought was interesting is that Alan Ormsby directed a film that was thought to be lost for a long time, called The Murder on the Emerald Seas. I saw a screening of it when they uncovered a print in Philly a couple of years ago. Huh. But that's a film about a cop being forced to go undercover as a woman on an ocean cruise to bust some drug dealers. And it's got like a slasher movie kind of element to it too, like somebody's wearing a mask and stabbing people. And this is like 1973 or 4, I think. So it's kind of like the slasher element is a small component of it, but it's definitely a pre-Halloween kind of masked stalker thing. But like that notion of like people being forced to do things in drag, kind of connects the two films, and they work together. But Ormsby and Clark had separate projects with that very specific weird theme.
Yeah, but this definitely wasn't a passion project for Clark. And, I mean, once him and Ormsby teamed up, I believe they just went and saw like Night of the Living Dead, and then they decided, we should try doing our own spin on it. And with like a budget of $40,000, they went and made this, super low budget children shouldn't play with dead things zombie feature that I remember renting with my friends, and it was one of the few that we kind of didn't get into. Like we just went, this just might, I don't know. This isn't working for us. This isn't making us laugh, or there isn't like that kind of outrageousness that we're used to. It's just, a lot of it's just kind of, I don't know, shrill to me and just goofy and not that interesting. Like to me, it's definitely like a first feature. It's it's something that obviously they had fun doing. There's no doubt that like all the people involved were having a blast, sort of just acting like zombies and just getting crazy together.
Yeah, I understand any objection to this one, and I didn't like it when I was a teenager, but I've grown to really like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. It's funny because it's Alan Ormsby and Bob Clark and like Jeff Gillen, like they worked on each other's plays. Like they were writing and directing and acting in one another's plays in college, and so they have this kind of like almost like rep company kind of feeling right from the get-go with this, and it feels like a hey, let's put on a show kind of quality to it that I think adds a bit of charm to it, even though Ormsby's director character in the film is deliberately very obnoxious, grating character, and I think that I think that character is a big part of why people check out. Plus the fact that it is so talky before any horror happens, but that gives it almost a feeling of a play in the woods. So it's odd because it already shows Bob Clark had a sense of how to build atmosphere, even with a situation like this, which is like got a lot of campy comedy and lots of scenery chewing, acting, and loud clothes. Before any horror really happens, it already has a creepy feel to it, in spite of the characters in a way. And I
definitely appreciate the score. And, there's, like you said, just some really sort of creepy graveyard ambience, and obviously it's practical effects, and a lot of but again, like, I don't know, the acting isn't very strong, and I just don't get caught up in it. And, there's just, I feel like it's almost, too lo-fi or something. Like there's just something about it that, doesn't gel with me, even though I could see why, it led to other things.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about it in relation to Deathdream, I mean, Deathdream was way less seen for many years versus Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, just because of how they were both distributed, and because Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, at the end of the day, was a zombie movie, like in a more conventional way, even though the zombie action doesn't happen until very late in the game. But a lot of the talent involved would work on both films. I'm thinking not like just the you mentioned the music, and Carl Zittrer, I think is how I might be mispronouncing the name, but he's somebody that is a major contributor to all the early Bob Clark films. That his soundtracks. I mean, especially when you get to things like Deathdream and Black Christmas, in terms of like creating the mood. And Jack McGowan, the DP, also the same person that also did Deathdream, the cinematographer. Like a lot of the, like a lot of the same crew, a lot of the same cast appears in both. It's an interesting trial run for like them making a horror film, but it doesn't have the same seriousness of intent as something like Deathdream, but in terms of like them getting comfortable making films and like learning the language, like it's a decent little effort. I mean, whatever problems it has, I think that it, I get why it has an enduring cult following, but I also get why people like Danny Perry, who's been on my show, like finds it bewildering that there was ever a following for this movie. It's and maybe at that time, because it comes in that those years between night and dawn, that there was a hunger for zombie movies in the Romero vein that wasn't being met yet. There's only like stray examples throughout the 70s before Dawn of the Dead and Lucio Fulci and things like that start. The zombie wave really kind of comes in like the early 80s, but this is at the time of things like Messiah of Evil and Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Like there's a couple of zombie movies, but this one, I don't know, like it just has like a certain kind of graveyard ambiance that it's a fun little romp if you're into it, but it feels like very much like friends making something in the woods, and whether or not you find them obnoxious or not is probably gonna make a big difference.
Yeah, I found it. I mostly found it obnoxious, but it's funny because like I think of Peter Jackson and like something like his first film, Bad Taste. I find that to be really, really obnoxious and kind of grating. But then suddenly you get to something like Dead Alive, and it feels like a huge
Well, you
step
think
up.
of you think of Dark Star and John Carpenter, and then I mean, there's a certain kind of like like jokey student film kind of element maybe to these films that kind of goes away with the follow up.
Yeah, and as much as I grew up loving A Christmas Story as a kid, my new favorite Bob Clark film that I hope everyone listening today will seek out is the one we're going to be reviewing here, Deathdream. And I want to say I definitely heard about it, but you were the one who sort of insisted I see it at some point in time. And obviously I'm grateful for you sending me the Blu-ray. But I think the first time I saw it, it definitely like I was not. Ooh, I think it was around the time too that I also saw Messiah of Evil, and it was like two movies that just like really invaded my subconscious in this unnerving way. Like there wasn't a lot of humor. It was just like, whoa, this is really dark. I mean, this gets really heavy. This gets really like almost soap opera-y, and not in a bad way either, with the family dynamics.
Well, and just so we say what the premise of Deathdream. I mean, it's a story of like a soldier who's gone off to war and is killed in the opening scene of the film.
Different actor though,
but then
that out.
kind of shades of the monkey's paw kind of idea. But like the mother refuses to give in to the idea that he's dead and wishes him back to life, but he comes back as a as a corpse, a walking corpse, but as a kind of a symbol of rage of like the soldiers that coming back from Vietnam, coming back with addictions, coming back with trauma, but done in a fantastic kind of Twilight Zone-y kind of treatment.
I died for you, Doc. Why shouldn't you return the favor?
Well, and so like I mean, political horror films. I mean, this is like a typical in that it's really foregrounding the politics of it. I mean, I'm a big fan of The Last House on the Left, and the original screenplay of that had a lot more overtly Vietnam referencing material to that. I mean, there were other examples of post Night of the Living Dead kind of social commentary kind of interwoven into exploitation films like those, but Deathdream would be one of the first to really take an anti-Vietnam stance in the horror genre, and also even just like not evoking any kind of counterculture either. Like it's one thing to make an anti-Vietnam film that's about student protests, but it's another thing to like set it in small town America and have an anti-Vietnam theme. And this is like well before you have any of the films that like are war films critical of the Vietnam War. It is still a kind of a going concern at the time, but it's I think that what I responded to, and this was a film that used to be quite hard to see. I had the VHS for it, but it was a film that took me years to find it, and it was originally it had many titles. I mean. I think for Dead of Night was what I knew it to be when I first started looking for it. And that's confusing because there was a famous British horror anthology called Dead of Night, but also a a made-for-television movie that Dan Curtis did in the 70s called Dead of Night. So it was like you were constantly running into one or the other, looking for this, pre-Black Christmas Bob Clark movie. But I think Deathdream might be what it first played on television as. I want to say it came out as. Did it come out as The Night Walk or The Night Andy Came Home?
The Night Walker, I think.
Thought it was The Night Walk, but it played under several titles. I think I don't know if it ever came out as The Veteran, or Whispers was another title. Like it had several, but yeah. Regardless of what you call it, I think Deathdream is my personal favorite of those titles. But
For sure.
yeah, and it reunites the couple from John Cassavetes' Faces, Lynn Carlin and John Marley, who are both
Oh, so good. And a lot of people would also remember John Marley from The Godfather, and sort of coming straight from that to something like this. I'm sure they were so grateful that they could get those two.
What I was going to say is like what I responded to the first time I saw it was like the eeriness of it, but also the melancholy, because you talk about Messiah of Evil. I mean, there was a whole slew of horror films, independent horror films in the early 70s that had like a slightly kind of art, not like arty, but like maybe a European feel or influence, or like a little bit of like the Bergman-y psychodrama thing, like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, or things that felt like maybe more experimental, like Ganja and Hess, but like things that were like a little bit unorthodox, but dealing with horror imagery, horror stories. And I think of Deathdream as being unusually heavy-hearted, because it's dealing with like very sad real life situation, as far as like the fate of soldiers in this war, and what they come, how many soldiers return as very broken, damaged people. But
it has a lot to say about PTSD and what soldiers and soldiers' families were experiencing. So that alone gets you emotionally involved in what's going on. Yes, it's a creepy horror film as well, but you can also look at he's sort of like a vampire zombie zombie kind of amalgam, but they also sort of include the need to numb away the pain and the trauma with drugs, essentially with Andy's need for blood, to sort of keep him stable in that regard. And I think that was an early example of implementing that sort of metaphor, if you will.
Yeah, I mean the drug addict image, in connection with vampirism is in a couple of films, but this is one of the earlier examples I can think of. I mean, Tom Savini went from this to do Martin a couple of years later with George Romero, and that also has that same idea, but it's
there's something about the tone of those films that just really like envelops you in similar ways to like a David Lynch creepy. There's something unnerving, unsettling, even if it's not, it's not your typical horror. It's not jump scares. It's not slasher. It's just, and I don't like using the term like, oh, it's all psychological, but there's just something like unsettling, about these worlds and and this particular tone in this era that I respond to, that I feel, like a connection towards. And it's similar to like when I reviewed Pulse on Genre Grinder, where it was like, this is just a mood piece that really gets to me, that just, I feel for what's going on, but I also just feel like, like almost something like Goosebumps, but not quite, just something like there's something it's seeping into me as I'm watching it. And certainly Richard Backus here. Holy crap, what a performance of detachment and explosive rage. And I would say my favorite moment in all of Clark's movies involves a pause between the family at that dinner table and it culminates in a slow smile.
No, I know the scene. Yeah, no,
Laughing.
I mean, I think that the opening of the film could be a perfect little short film. Just yeah,
Yeah, that pullback,
yeah,
could be the final shot.
yeah. No, and people always, whenever I show Deathdream to people, that always gets a big nervous laugh. Yeah, no, I love.
I think they're nervously
Yeah,
laughing
yeah.
too, and it's just a
Yeah,
great
well, it has. I
moment.
mean, it's very much like the supernatural comes to suburban small town America, and yeah, no, and I'm trying to think like how often suburbia was even a setting for those kinds of stories, because this is well before things like Halloween, and I'm trying to think what, because horror was so often tied to the gothic kind of imagery, prior to.
Or something like Texas Chainsaw
Yeah,
Massacre.
yeah. Well, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, kind of goes into that fear of rural America, fear of the South, fear of rednecks, that kind of thing. But as far as like zombies in suburbia, or like menace to suburbia, I don't know that it was as common before Deathdream. I mean, unless I'm forgetting some big examples, but yeah, no, I think that a lot of what. I mean, more people would have seen Black Christmas at this point, I think, but I think that a lot of the things that make that film work, as far as the eerie, dissonant kind of music and sense of mood, these things are already kind of fully fleshed out in Deathdream, and it's been nice seeing it, in the wake of Blue Underground's reissue, find more of a cult audience, but it's still, it deserves a wider recognition than it's had.
Yeah, and I still can't believe the moment involving the dog. And to me, like, going there is hard to watch, and yet you kind of you involve it, like it involves you in a really extreme way, because not only is what he's doing to the dog is really horrible, but the fact that he's doing it in front of kids, and the trauma that he's causing them in that moment is terrifying, and certainly the father's sort of internalized fear of what his son has become, and certainly how it plays out with his alcoholism later on, and there's like Cassavetes like anger and lashing out, even at like the poor daughter, when he comes home drunk, it's just, the father is a total asshole.
I think about Alan
No.
Ormsby as the screenwriter of this, and thinking of coming from the theater, and it feels like a play, like a message-heavy play, but it's also a creature feature, and I think that that's an interesting kind of blend, because it is, he is somebody that is coming from that political theater idea, as far as, but he's also somebody that grew up with, like, a love of monster makeup and Lon Chaney movies, and so he's kind of merging these two things, and he's who I think of as much the author of that film, of Deathdream, and why it kind of stands apart from other Bob Clark movies. I think Alan Ormsby is a big part of why that film is a great film, and
yet it's really beautifully it's well directed. Like I mentioned, the pullback shot. He's very graceful with his camera work, and I know we'll touch on Black Christmas later, but it's just like there are things about his style. So, I think a lot of it is subtle, but I just also think that he knows where to put the camera in the right place, and certainly when to move the camera and not move the camera. Like, he's just, I'm really surprised that even early on in his career, it's not choppy. It's like a lot of this just feels beautifully put together. Not just from a screenplay standpoint, but as a director early on. Whereas like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things is kind of like a little bit more loose, to say the least. I feel like here, because of the material, he took it more seriously. He might have been more deliberate with his
well,
camera
and
work.
it has a deliberate kind of pacing to it. I mean, it is more about character and mood and melancholy than it is about
Yeah.
shocks, but it has a few of those. Yeah, and
Oh,
it
for sure.
also has broad humor. I mean, this is something that we're going to have to talk about because Bob Clark didn't go into comedies for quite a while, but when he made Tribute is the first one that has like a lot of overt comedy, the Jack Lemmon film. But there were reviews of that that say like, well, Bob Clark is not a comedy director, so this is and blah blah blah, and like you get a sense that he was always pushing to work in lighter material, and so even as far back as the horror films, there's a lot of comic downtime to them to give. But
Oh,
all of
certainly in
them,
Black
I mean,
Christmas.
have that, and Deathdream has it too. Maybe the most awkwardly, like the stuttering cook in the diner, and even some of the one liners with the girlfriend. I mean, it's giving audiences some breathing room so that it's not so tense the entire time. Even something like Deranged, which isn't a Bob Clark directed film, but has a very strong Bob Clark influence. He edited it, he produced it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think I've always had a curiosity to watch it, basically because of its place in history, and certainly it came out, I believe, before Texas Chainsaw, right?
It's around the same time.
Or was it around the same time?
I can't remember when it comes in relation. It might be the same year, but I can't remember. They got compared a little bit, but I mean, Deranged, for those that don't know, is like a take on the Ed Gein story. I mean, it's more or less at the time it was a more closer to the facts take on the Ed Gein material than something like Psycho. But Robert Blossoms plays the main character, and it's co-directed by Jeff Gillen and Alan Ormsby, and Alan Ormsby wrote the screenplay. Bob Clark produced it, but he wouldn't put his name on it. I don't think he takes editing credit either, but he was the editor as well. For him, he felt it was too grim. He didn't want to be associated with it that way. But I think he thought it was a fine effort. But that's a film that has a little bit of outrageous violence. Like there's like a there's like a split open head with like brain eating or something that was like cut from some prints of it that I remember, like buying a bootleg of it and like having the complete version that MGM had put out on DVD. But that's a film that a lot of the technical credits, like, has another Carl Zitterer score, has a Jack McGowan is the DP again.
Oh, nice.
It's like definitely a cousin to things like Deathdream and Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things and Black Christmas, but it's not. It has like. It's not quite as confident as Black Christmas or Deathdream, but it has effective set pieces. I mean, there's one sequence in particular that really freaked out my roommate in college when we were watching it. As far as like a scene where he brings a woman back, and I don't want to spoil it, but it's like a menacing scene, but like wearing the skin masks and things that like do kind of evoke. Later kind of Gein inspired things like Texas Chainsaw or even Silence of the Lambs, with the skin mask.
Yeah, things like this. Probably the reason why I haven't seen it yet too. It's like I don't know. Sitting with something like Maniac, the original Maniac, I don't feel as strongly as a lot of horror fans do about spending 90 minutes with somebody that is basically just going around killing women. And I don't know if that's pleasant at this point in time, but also just as I've gotten older, I've turned more into my dad, and that I that's not what I want to see necessarily. And it's not necessarily to take away from the artistry of horror films that do that, because certainly I respect Maniac more than I appreciate.
I don't think Deranged is quite as grim as Maniac, but because it's based on a real life case. I mean, maybe it feels like that, and it has some scenes that are that are unpleasant, but it also has a lot of black humor to it. And again, that's the Bob Clark influence, is that like he's not interested in a completely serious horror movie. Like he needs some breaks in the suspense, you know.
Yeah, and I think he does that well. I definitely do, and certainly in Death Dream, and I think it walks a fine line, especially when he's walking around with those glasses, and like oh man, he looks so cool, but it's also creepy at the same time, and his just like dead stare and or just him just like sitting in a rocking chair is effective, and I think again the sound design is really really great throughout, and we mentioned the score, and that's something that'll carry on over into Black Christmas, where it's atonal and it's very minimal, and it's sometimes just like scraping against piano strings that works really well, and there's even a couple of jump scares here and there, but not like in a manipulative way. I think it seamlessly works, and then it ultimately becomes incredibly sad. Uh, the final moments, I'm surprised at how moved I am by everything, because essentially this is just a zombie movie in a way, but because of the mother's reaction to how things are, and obviously she's been in the wrong with how she's reacted to everything, but at the same time you feel for her.
Yeah, well, that's something with Bob
So
Clark
yeah,
movies, is that the who to root for, who your protagonists are. I mean, in a lot of his films, I'm noticing, it's not it's not always like a group of characters that are your main characters who are the most like obviously likable. I mean, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. Obviously, we talk about how those characters can be a little bit obnoxious before they start getting killed off by zombies. Yeah, and you look at Death Dream, and it's like you have a kind of like an authoritarianish kind of dad, like a mother who's stubborn and a little bit shrill, and their rude zombie son. Like these are your characters, and then like you go look later on, and you have whether or not people find the high school students in the Porky's films likable or not is probably very subjective. But even things like From the Hip with Judd Nelson as like a yuppie lawyer, or trying to think some other examples off the top of my head, but like, I mean, he's not always going with the most obviously sympathetic protagonists. And Death Dream, I don't know. I think it's tricky to have a horror film end on an emotionally melancholy note, is versus something like Black Christmas, which pushes ahead towards like nail biting suspense. Like Death Dream seems to have
both are effective. That's the thing that I notice is like, because it's important to have a final note, and that's probably why I'm a little conflicted about the new Charlie Kaufman. I think your final note should be relatively not simple or clear. It leaves you with a feeling that either makes you want to watch it again, or it makes you emotional, or it makes you want to think about it, later in the day, or however long. And it's just like both of those movies are kind of subtle. Well, this one maybe not so much, as I guess subtle is not the right word. It's like the thing that the mother says at the very end, I think, kind of sums it all up in a very political way. And him just lying down there in the grave. But at the same time, like you said, there's just an air of melancholy that I think really, really hits home in a beautiful way that, certainly not all horror films can achieve.
Yeah, no, I agree. In terms of like how it was received at the time, I mean, it really didn't play very widely, and I think
especially in the U.S., right? Like I think it was successful in France, maybe. Like I felt like they got it, maybe more towards the political angle. And maybe it did a little bit better in Canada, but I think in the U.S. it was
seemed
not
to
a success.
Really reach more people on television under the Death Dream title, but as Dead of Night in theaters, it really, and among other titles, it really kind of struggled to reach an audience. And I think when I saw it, well, no, I didn't get to see it when Maitland McDonough programmed a series at Lincoln Center in the early 2000s, and that was, I think, the first time it ever played theatrically in New York. If I'm correct about that, and that was like a retrospective of like mostly overlooked horror films of the 70s and early 80s, and that was part of the retrospective. Lamora, Child's Tale of the Supernatural, Raw Meat, the Gary Sherman film. There was a couple of things that were interesting little sleepers that were a part of this retrospective, but Deathdream did play Lincoln Center as part of that retrospective, and then really with, I think, the release of the DVD and then the Blu-ray through Blue Underground seems to be how most people are catching up with it. But the other horror film that he made around this time that also went out under more than one title and is much better known now is Black Christmas, which we should at least touch on that. Or did you want to jump to the other main thing? I don't know how you want to do it.
Yeah, let's jump to our next film of discussion,
Okay.
and then we'll circle back and talk about the two Christmas movies. But one final note about Deathdream is that I want to say, keep Eli Roth away from a remake. I keep reading that was a possibility. I don't know if it still is, but strangely enough, I'm a fan of both of the Black Christmas remakes. I'm weird. I've watched them all within the span of a couple months, and I went, you know what? I like them all. That's all there is to it. But I don't know if I want to see a remake of Deathdream.
I feel like there's already been something close to it in Joe Dante's Homecoming for the Masters of Horror series.
Right. Which I did see when it first aired, and yeah, I thought it was pretty great.
But it's also
I would like to watch it
explicitly political. It has like a stand-in for Ann Coulter as one of the characters. I mean, it is very unsubtly partisan film, but it's the same principle as far as like the soldiers coming back as the Walking Dead. But the punchline there is that they're coming back to vote Bush out of office. So it's a little different than Deathdream. It's the same idea, as far as the ravages of war and like walking symbols of symbols of the war. But we got.
I don't need to see Eli Roth do this, though. I really don't. I liked a few of his movies early on, but at this point, I don't know. I wouldn't like that as much.
I don't think you're gonna see a remake from him. That was something that was rumored, I think, even before Hostel. So yeah, those are old rumors. Geez. I don't think that's something he's likely to do now. Well,
now we have the most, or at least for a while, it was known as the most successful Canadian film ever made. I think but now for some reason, Resident Evil Afterlife is the most successful one. I don't know how that happened. But it's a little sex comedy called Porky's. And I'm actually bummed this is where his career went. Because I think, I mean, you're right. Like he mentioned that he didn't have the passion for the horror genre outside of his successes in the 70s. But I think he could have remained more of like a Larry Cohen or a Stuart Gordon if he wanted to.
Well, without going in depth on the films, I would say that just to bring us up to Porky's, he followed Deathdream with Black Christmas, which also came out as Silent Night, Evil Night. And this was a success, not like a sleeper success, but not like a breakaway hit the way Halloween would be. And then he moved towards the most self-consciously classy period of the career, which was Murder by Decree and Tribute. And Murder by Decree was this Sherlock Holmes investigating the Jack the Ripper murders, and it has like a very kind of fancy cast. You have people like James Mason and Christopher Plummer, Donald Sutherland, Genevieve Bujold, like very Gielgud, yeah.
Gielgud,
and it's got his atmosphere, like his sense of like menace to it, but it's not quite a horror movie anymore. Like he's moving away from the genre already, and it's got.
And that seemed like the ideal transitionary
Yeah,
film for him to get out, because like it has elements of it, certainly with the murder scenes or the stalking point of view
yeah.
shots and stuff like
It
that.
retains like some of the skills he developed in the straight up horror movies, but it's already pushing towards something else. And then Tribute is an adaptation of a play. Hold on, it is Bernard Slade is the guy's name, but it's an adaptation of a play that Jack Lemmon had been doing already, and that film got Golden Globe and Oscar nominations for Jack Lemmon. I think it won Lemmon won a Genie, the Canadian equivalent to the Oscars, won an acting award, a Genie for Lemmon, and it was a comedy drama and a very likable film. I guess maybe we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but but that kind of gave him the clout to make what he wanted to make, which was Porky's. And Porky's was something that he had written it like a few years earlier, and I think in the wake of things like American Graffiti.
I was
Yeah,
just
but
gonna say
even
that,
like you
yeah.
look at something like Last Picture Show. I mean, there's a couple of things you could point to that are like sexual coming of age in the 50s kind of films happening in the early 70s that Porky's is a little bit like connected to those, and it's also kind of it's coming in the wake of Animal House, which is a college sex comedy, but that same kind of outrageous body humor. So I don't know why Porky's was hard for him to get made. I don't know if they found it too extreme or too tacky or what, but it was actually harder for him to get that made. But that was a personal project that the clout of doing Tribute helped him to get this thing made, and he produced it himself. And
You would think with the success of something like Animal House, this wouldn't be hard to make. That's a college comedy through and through, and you had somebody like John Belushi and that remarkable cast, and certainly John Landis behind it and everything. But I don't know why it would be hard to get Porky's made for him.
So it did come out, and it became, in a way, it feels like the Friday the 13th to Animal House's Halloween to me, as far as like you had the one in the 70s that kind of laid down the template, and then you had the reinforcing hit that made it a subgenre, and was even in some ways like an even bigger success. And Porky's was like the Friday the 13th of teen sex comedies. It wasn't the first, it wasn't the even the one that made up all the rules, but I think that Porky's, I know Mike McPadden, who wrote a book called Teen Movie Hell, obviously talks about like all the Porky's and the films that come in the wake of it. I mean, Porky's was you could say Porky style comedy and you knew exactly what that meant. It meant like a raunchy sex farce kind of comedy. Like, and so this is a film that like is very much full of pranks, that is very much full of I don't even know that has like an awful amount of nudity to it, all things considered, and it actually has a fair amount of male nudity to female nudity. Like the ratio is actually quite a lot more even than you might expect. Maybe even more.
Yeah, and pretty much around this time, after this movie came out, if you were going to a drive-in and you were, in high school around this time, you basically had two choices. You either had the sex comedy or the slasher film, and around this time, I obviously I was too young, but I just heard that like this just set off an entire spree of films that eventually like I would come to know all about these films, like the films covered in Mike's book, through the cheater box that my dad had. And like at 2 a.m. on HBO, I'd come across something like Hot Dog the Movie or your Hamburger the Motion Picture or Meatballs 3, and it was just really protagonists really just want to get laid. That's all. That's really all. That's the plot, and I think something like we talk about melancholy, something like Last American Virgin at least has that, final note of melancholy, which kind of, is a surprise in the
Well,
midst of
the thing
all
with
that came
Porky's is that
before it.
it does have a serious element to it as well, which is, I mean,
Yeah,
in terms
later
of
on for
like
sure. Yeah, I can.
dealing with prejudice, because I mean, it's a film that
Mhm.
is set in the South, like in Florida in the 50s. So it's definitely like a time when like the racism and that's something that's tackled more explicitly in Porky's to the Next Day. But like the notion of like you know smuggling in some kind of progressive message stuff, to swim against all of the outrageous embarrassment, humor to it. Like it does have like some kind of covert political themes. And then it's interesting in that like a film like this would often get labeled misogynistic or anti-women, but the women in it are pretty, I want to say they're portrayed like as very much equals to the guys in this. They might not be the main characters, but um they aren't just objects to be
Objects.
conquested by the guys. It makes fun of the guys for like their immaturity about sex. And I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't like argue that it's like a very progressive movie like in secret, but it's not quite as objectionable by contemporary standards as you might think going into it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that was definitely a surprise. But at the same time, I'm just not the biggest fan of this genre. I mean, maybe when I was younger, I found it more silly and fun, but I was never crazy about Meatballs or Animal House or even Fast Times, which is beloved, and, American Pie, I just thought was dumb and, it had some funny moments or whatever. But, you know, when I saw that and like the entire audience was like uproariously laughing, I wasn't necessarily in the same boat in the same way I was with the Hangover movies. I just kind of went, that was fine. I don't know. I don't get it. It's like there's some comedies that just don't work, and most of the comedy in Porky's is just not my scene. But I like I'd say the only time this kind of setup and scenario works for me is Risky Business, because I find that to be more realistic, more cynical. It is about being horny in high school, but there's a lot going on in terms of commentary about capitalism and all sorts of things, including, what you're supposed to do with your life.
Risky
in
Business is
college
the
and-
art film of the teen sex comedies. Like, I mean, right down to the Tangerine Dream,
yeah.
like kind of dreamy score, and the fact that it is talking about capitalism, and it is an outlier, even though it was like just as much a big hit as something like Porky's. But I like
You like Animal House?
I like it fine. This is not really a subgenre that I am like that crazy about either. I mean, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, I absolutely love, but that feels like a different thing. I mean, the ones that have like a hint of melancholy, I think I respond to more, and like that one and Last American Virgin and Valley Girl are the
Valley
ones that
Girl's
I
another
like
one
from
I
this
like, yeah.
genre. But like I mean, like when I was younger, and just wanted to see like the nudity of it, like something like Animal House, sure, had that appeal to it. At this point in my life, like, I don't know that these films really are my sense of humor so much. But I don't hate them. I think that there's an interest to them. And I think something like Porky's, I just thought, in terms of his career, like Porky's was like, it had a cultural impact that is, something that people might not remember so much, because it's never been a cool movie. It's never been a critically well thought of movie. So I don't know how often people discuss it, even though it had like this enormous commercial and cultural impact at the time, to the horror of film critics. And I think that, Christmas Story aside, Bob Clark has always been a very critically reviled filmmaker from this point on in his career, and he's often singled out in the reviews as like, in the way that like someone like Michael Bay isn't even like targeted in the reviews as like a bad, problematic director. But Porky's really offended everybody. And it's funny, if you look at Porky's 2, I don't know if you had a chance to watch that, but
No, I didn't get to the sequel. I mean, I hear it's a little better than the
it's
original.
not like a radical departure, but Porky's 2 does is that it seems to hear the criticisms of Porky's, and like I know Mike made this connection. I thought of it also, the Magnum Force in relation to Dirty Harry. Like, it's something that is, aware of the criticisms. And the thing with Porky's 2 is that it takes the prejudice angle further. The premise of Porky's 2 is that they're going to put on a Shakespeare play. They're going to perform like and with a Native American lead playing Romeo and Juliet. And first they're targeted by a preacher, like who's like saying how smutty Shakespeare is. And then it ties in the Klan, who are upset that there's going to be this interracial romantic element to it. And so they go to a politician who's corrupt and trying to sleep with their 17-year-old, the girl from the, from the gang from Porky's, so you have corrupt politicians, you have corrupt clergy, a religious figure, and you have racists, you have the Klan. And so the prank-loving, gang from Porky's, like, these are the new targets for their rude kind of antics. And so it's, rather than like Porky and like pulling apart this kind of rednecks, bordello, they're going after the term punching up. Like, they're going after targets that a liberal audience would be like, yeah, go after, corrupt politicians, or go after the Klan's, racist, go after these people. And so
there's a little more catharsis then when you watch something like that, because I always cheer that on, deep down, when it comes to like vengeance. And even here with the original, I do like the elaborate takedown, towards the end, like the lengths that they go to an exact vengeance on Porky is quite entertaining. Like, I find that way more interesting than, the sexual frustration angle, or the voyeuristic shower scene and stuff like that. Like, I found that's more my scene when it comes to like, let's get revenge on the bad guys and do it in a fun way, and then watch what happens.
Yeah, and so I mean, it is, and not that critics gave Porky's 2 any kind of pass. I'm pretty sure it got all bad reviews, but it was making an effort to make some political points, but still, be a Porky's 2, like still have like, like gratuitous nudity and like, the same kind of like embarrassment comedy thing. Like, it's still trying to hit those notes, but it's the targets, feel more self-consciously righteous. And that may or may not be also the influence of Alan Ormsby comes back into the fold to co-write that one. Yeah. And it even has a graveyard type scene and a guy in zombie makeup, that's like very children shouldn't play with dead things ish kind of variation on the Cherry Forever scene in the first film. Like, as far as like a scene where like they think they're going to get laid, but it's really just to scare them, that kind of same kind of joke, but done in a cemetery with zombie makeup. So it's, a little bit like the beginning of Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. So yeah, the Porky's movies, I mean,
it might be worth.
I don't want to
that sounds like fun.
If you're kind of like lukewarm on Porky's, I don't want to like make Porky's 2 sound like, well, this is, the Evil Dead 2, or like, it's not like it doesn't reinvent anything. Like, it's it's safely in like alongside it. Porky's Revenge is a different story. That's not Bob Clark, and that's, a few people have remarked that just, these high schoolers are getting a little bit old looking.
Yeah. I mean, I let's face it. I like watching dudes get humiliated for being like so sex obsessed. Like, because I mean, I understand the motivation. I was a teenager. I understand, like, being in that frame of mind, but I appreciate the fact that you're right. Like, even just the famous shower voyeurism scene culminates in a tug of war with the gym teacher. Like, I mean, and that's funny. To me, it's not as creepy as I thought, because even the girls are laughing rather than being terrified.
They're just like the guys. Like, and that's the thing that I think, even like like something like Animal House, you don't really get the sense that there's a female equivalent to the Delta fraternity guys. Whereas in Porky's, even though those characters are not really given as much attention in terms of screen time, you get a sense that they like sex just as much, they like pranks just as much. They're not they're equals, and so I don't know. I mean, it's again, I don't want to overstate the progressive element of it, but it's aged well enough, in by contemporary standards. I mean, you could.
It's more interesting than I thought. Like, I thought when we initially decided on like this being the other movie as opposed to maybe Black Christmas, I just kind of went, I don't know this. And even Patrick commented on that. He was like, what are you going to find interesting about Porky's? And I think there are interesting things about it, including what we've mentioned. And certainly it is a movie that's kind of more obsessed with male genitals, because like they're really self-conscious about it, and certainly like they get exposed in humiliating ways early on with the
Cherry Forever.
Cherry, what's her name again? Yeah, Cherry Forever. That whole sequence is like, whoa. But I mean, like, I do think it has a heart too. Like we mentioned, it's a movie that punishes intolerance and bigotry, and I find I may not find it funny throughout, but like I said, I saw the American Graffiti quality that Bob Clark was trying to infuse in this. But in vast contrast, I gotta say though that I've never liked Kim Cattrall in anything. I found her orgasm scene to be insufferable. I just couldn't.
I really like her a lot in Tribute, the film that they made together before this. So it reminds me of how Bogdanovich used Colleen Camp in They All Laughed, and that it's like a good vehicle for this person that had, maybe been cast just for, being pretty, as like someone that has like real comic timing and given a chance to be like funnier than anyone else in the scenes. Whereas the guy has to play more like the straight man part in the dynamic. Porky's is not quite as gives her much to do, but like according to Bob Clark, that actually was based on a real thing that he remembered. There was actually like a Porky's hideaway in Florida when he was growing up. Then there was a guy named Porky that ran it, and so some of the and they never really could get permission. So Bob Clark was always kind of quick to say, "Oh, there's no real connection. It's a coincidence." A lot of things are called Porky's. But I don't know how many stories were kind of based on real life things, that he experienced, but or that his friends experienced and he heard about it. But yeah, that personal quality to it that's something I always found interesting, is that like, his most personal film in some ways is the most crassly commercial film. And, that's just, it's kind of like if Sean Cunningham, no one would let him make Friday the 13th, but he had the story to tell. And so he finally got a chance to tell his personal story. And it just happened to be this critically reviled, commercially lucrative franchise thing that kind of kickstarted a whole subgenre. I think,
yeah, that's remarkable. And I feel bad for Siskel and Ebert, because all you had at that point is, all right, we know the slasher movies are successful and cheap to make. We know that sex comedies are cheap and successful too. So let's just keep churning those out.
Yeah.
And
well,
and there's value in both of them. I that's the thing, is like, I almost thought like, okay, I'm just going to completely dismiss Porky's as, and similarly the way that they did. But I found merit. I found value. There are things about it that I think make it worth your time, even though I don't think in the end it's like, top tier Clark for me.
Yeah, I get their objection, but I also think they sound a little bit
Old man, get off my lawn.
kind of. Well, but here's the thing. So Porky's is not aimed at Siskel and Ebert. It's aimed at 13-year-old boys. Like it. So that's the thing when we talk about Bob Clark's career going forward. A lot of these are aimed at much younger viewers, and so it's even A Christmas Story. I mean, they are seldom aimed at an adult audience again. Like, I mean, there are exceptions, but for the most part, he's moving towards family-friendly, broad comedy, sentimentality, moving, very much away from the things that he was doing in the 1970s, whether it be the horror films or like the classier, more adult fare like Murder by Decree or Tribute. Like, he's not interested in that being the career. He's interested in doing, films.
Maybe he wanted more of an audience, and I respect him for that.
Yeah, well, even the violence was something he was not comfortable with, which is why he took his name off Deranged. And, the violence in something like Black Christmas is way more suggested than it is depicted. But even that, like, it's not really what he wanted to do. He later, the only other time he returned to the horror genre was he produced, I don't think he's credited on the final film, but Popcorn. Which Alan Ormsby was the original director of that. I don't know how well you remember Popcorn, but that has almost matinee style, like fake B movies that they're watching, but then there's a killer killing people in the theater. But that
I should watch that again because I remember being mixed on it when I first saw it, and I don't think it's entirely successful, but
it isn't.
I think there are things about it that are interesting.
Yeah, there are. I mean, it's got a mixed parentage because Alan Ormsby got fired off of it and they recast the lead actress with Jill Schoelen from Stepfather. But that's a case where Bob Clark and Alan Ormsby were returning to the horror genre for the first time since I think the last time Ormsby was involved in a horror was he wrote the first version of the first draft of what became Paul Schrader's Cat People remake. But they had otherwise stayed away from horror until Popcorn, and it was not a happy experience for anybody.
That's too bad,
unfortunately. But Bob Clark, was, when they wanted him to direct Popcorn, and he was like, "No, I'm done with horror." Black Christmas was the last one he wanted to do, which is a good one to go out on if you're, gonna leave the genre behind. It's like leave it with a major work. But and
I know that he wanted to make A Christmas Story for a long time, but just couldn't get support from the studio. And once he had the success with Porky's, the studio was like, okay, you want to do A Christmas Story? You got to do a sequel to Porky's.
Yeah.
So he sort of agreed to that because now he finally could get made what he wanted to make. And this was a true passion project. So if anything, Porky's is responsible for a holiday classic, and I return to it time and time again, mainly just because it is nostalgia. It's like comfort food at this point. It's like, and I do put it on, around the Christmas holiday season. It's in the background. I don't always engage with it the way I used to. But it's one of those that I think our family just watched so regularly around the holidays that I just sort of grew to love and appreciate everything about it, including, going back and sort of reading the work of Gene Shepard, because this is based on a story that he wrote called, I think it was in a book called In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash.
Yeah.
And so as someone who loved this and the Wonder Years, it's like both of them sort of, I think, I don't think that the Wonder Years would have existed without A Christmas Story. I really don't. I think
I never made that connection, but you're absolutely right because of the narration.
Yeah, and certainly just the the nostalgic quality, the growing up in the 50s, and I keep reading that they call this town Homan, Indiana, but I could have sworn it's always been Hammond, Indiana. That's what Gene Shepard says in A Christmas Story, but maybe I'm just mishearing it. Because they all, like, some of the things I read about it, people were just saying like, "Oh, it's a fictional town called Holman, Indiana." And I'm like, wait a minute, I've always associated it as Hammond, Indiana, which is a small town that I grew up nearby. Obviously, it wasn't shot there. I think it was actually shot in Ohio, maybe Cleveland.
I think Cleveland.
Yeah, but there's a reason why it's a classic. There's a lot of charm to it. I think Darren McGavin is one of the most memorable fathers in movie history in this. I think he's phenomenal in it. I also really love Melinda Dillon and everything. So, I can understand, like, if you're coming at this not as like a family classic that you've seen over and over and over again, maybe it doesn't, have that same place in your heart. But for me, it does. And yet at the same time, the most recent time I've seen it, the very end of the film, I actually hate.
Which,
like, I can't stand them going to that Chinese restaurant and them laughing at the way they're singing. Like, now people find that offensive, and I'm kind of on board with that. I mean, it's supposed to be funny, but I think that they could have just completely cut that scene and it would have been a much stronger ending. Like, I know that the fact that, like, okay, they don't have their turkey now, so they have to go out to eat somewhere, but I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't. It's like, look at the way their accents are. Look at how funny they sing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that watching it again this week, and how something like Porky's would be thought of as being, beyond the pale, politically incorrect. But Christmas Story is never criticized, and I feel like the way race is handled in Christmas Story is probably a little bit, more eyebrow raising, I guess, in that scene anyway. But
and don't get me started the portrayal of the Bumpuses in the sequel.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well,
Horrible.
I mean, Christmas Story for me, it is one of those films like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where a lot of gags were spoiled for me on the playground at school. So by the time I actually caught up with the film, I felt like I'd already heard, "You'll shoot your eye out" and all that, so many times that it, kind of muted all of the impact of them. And it's a film that I've seen it maybe 5 or 6 times now, but it's never been like a holiday staple for me the way that it is for so many people. For me, I'm like, It's a Wonderful Life is a film that, like, is also a holiday staple for a lot of people, and that's one I've seen so many times that I can skip it because I know it by heart. But Christmas Story is one that when I watch it, I like it. Like, I'm not gonna be criticizing of that film, but it's not a film that it has ever really been close to my heart. It's just one I can appreciate. Like, this is perfectly pleasant. I like the look of it. The certain scenes, I get why they work. Like, I can see how this would make a lot of people very happy, but I don't. It kind of leaves me, nodding my head like, "Yep, there it is." But I don't. It doesn't make me laugh, and I don't find it that, like, moving. I
find it more charming.
Yeah,
and heartwarming. I mean,
it's sweet. I like Christmas movies. I like small town Americana kind of movies. Like, I like it fine when it's on, but I don't latch on to it the way its humongous cult following has latched onto it. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's fine. Like, I get it. I appreciate it. I get why people see it as the heartwarming outlier to this very crude, cynical career of Bob Clark. Like, I get why it's confounding to the Leonard Maltins and Roger Eberts of the world that Bob Clark would go from Porky's to this. And if it's on, I'm definitely not unhappy about it, but it is not. I think something about Gene Shepard's narration. He always sounds like somebody that is about to laugh at his own joke.
I think he does. I wouldn't be surprised. I think he does in this movie.
Yeah, like he sounds like an older relative that has a halfway funny story to tell you, but they think it's really funny. And so it always kind of, I have to settle into that rhythm when I watch it. I like the look of it. I like, again, like, the cast is perfect in it. Melinda Dillon is great. Like, I get it. but it's not one of my favorites of his.
I can understand that too. At the same time, it's like, does it stand out in the way that I feel his horror films did? I don't think so. But it's also, it's one that's like a part of the, it's a part of the culture, and like to the point where there's museums are dedicated to the film, and like there are things about it that are timeless for a lot of reasons, and very quotable. I mean, Darren McGavin's quotable throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of impervious to any criticism at this point anyway. I think at this point, it kind of overtakes It's a Wonderful Life or Miracle on 34th Street or any other holiday perennial. Like it is America's Christmas movie now. I mean, I think at this point, it is the most beloved holiday film.
But also Black Christmas is beloved too.
Yeah, that's one I'm more likely to watch in December. But
I will now. I mean, I think I've always liked Black Christmas, but the most recent viewing, I was like, oh crap, I think I love this movie now.
Yeah,
it took a while, but I think that it's because I always felt like it lived in the shadow of Halloween, and I grew up seeing Halloween dozens of times before even getting around to Black Christmas, and I just like went, well, it's no Halloween, but clearly I know the order, in which these films came out. And it's certainly funny to hear like Bob Clark say, oh, no. John Carpenter didn't steal my idea or anything,
Yeah. Well, the thing as a side note, like everybody seems to take credit for Halloween. I mean, the producer takes credit for it. Carpenter takes credit for it. Bob Clark takes credit for it a little bit. Like that's the thing with like a popular game changer film like Halloween. It's like everybody wants to say, well, good thing I thought of this or good thing I thought of that. Black Christmas, the first time I saw it, I think was on VHS, and I knew from reading about it that people would say that Halloween is good, but it's borrowing a lot from Black Christmas. And so that's a pretty tall order. And so the first time I saw it as a teenager, I was a little bit underwhelmed because Halloween, it is not. But, going back to it, I think in college is when I started really kind of rewatching Black Christmas a lot. And I think it holds its own pretty well against most 70s horror movies, to my mind. I think you could put it in the same conversation as Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and, any of the more popular celebrated franchise launching horror movies of that period. I think that it's scary still. I think that when I show it to people, that are pretty jaded horror movie people, like that's one of the only films from the 70s that really scares people the way whatever the contemporary film of the moment is. Like, and it's got effective jump scares. It's got effective dread building, and it takes all the things that work in Deathdream in that respect, but it leaves out the melancholy, but it also it allows for complicated young people to be the center of it. Like they aren't just a virgin and the slutty friends kind of template that Halloween and Friday the 13th.
Oh no, yeah, these are real characters.
These are like more complicated people, and it's a brilliant ensemble. Everybody is great in it. I mean, Olivia Hussey, like these are not just drive-in movie starlets that show up for a film or two and then they're out of the business. I mean, these are people like Margot Kidder that have comic timing, that have like a way to really bring even the supporting characters to life in a real memorable way.
Andrea Martin, who I just associate with being a comedian, through and through, thanks to SCTV, is actually really good. And crazy Mrs. Mac, with hiding booze in toilets and stuff.
Well, it's that broad comedy thing, and like that's again the Bob Clark thing is like wanting to, like, that's something you don't find in Halloween. Like Halloween plays it very straight. This
or that laughing cop. When John Saxon is like finding out about that whole that cop is just like, oh my gosh, there's always got to be bumbling cops, just like in Last House on the Left, I guess. Oh well, no.
yeah. Well, I mean that's probably one of the first of many cops that John Saxon played. I mean, I don't even know if like his casting in Nightmare on Elm Street is a reference to Black Christmas, but
Wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, but I mean, this is the thing with like the phone calls, like
Ooh.
are, I mean, for me they work, and they work in a way that's like it's just eerie and odd. That's a hard thing to pull off, because it's one thing to have like effective jump scares, but to have something linger in a scary way. I mean, for me, those moments work, and the like the way that the killer imitates the cat when the first girl is murdered from the closet. It's such a spooky little moment that I don't know. It doesn't get over familiar for me, and it has all of the atmosphere that you want in a horror movie, as far as like just like you get a sense of the cold, like a sense of the just how unpleasant the environment is. I don't know. It's such an effective film that at this point I think is thought of as a classic. I mean, I know that both of the two other Black Christmas movies are controversial and in their own way. But in Black Christmas, the original, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's grown up about itself, as even compared to Halloween. I think it's like tackling themes of like abortion. It's tackling
Yeah, which is something people weren't prepared for, I think, at the time.
no.
It was to include that here. It was very audacious, and certainly, I watching it now too. I thought of like, well, when was the Steadicam introduced? And it wasn't until like a couple years after this movie. And I was like, some of the shots here are so graceful, and just like the way it's filmed. I'm guessing it must be, on a dolly track or something, but also just the early killer point of view shots. I was like, well,
Yeah.
I could see why Carpenter was influenced a little bit.
Yeah, Reginald Morris was the DP
cool,
on this one. Reginald Morris was the DP on a lot of Bob Clark movies, but this is a new cameraman. Like Jack McGowan shot all the early ones, and then Reginald Morris is the guy that would shoot Murder by Decree and Porky's Christmas Story. And this was their first collaboration. And yeah, the camera work, you can tell, is an influence on what people like John Carpenter would appropriate and maybe do with in a different style. I mean, like Dean Cundy's work in Halloween is pretty striking in its own right. It's not a copy. I mean, but it is but they pick up on things that Bob Clark does in this, and obviously the killer is in the house kind of things, like When a Stranger Calls. I mean, I know that there's I think by the time you get to things like Scream, it's almost kind of overkill. But like at the time, that was a really new gimmick, for a teen slasher movie. And this is early enough on that there's really not that many prior. I mean, sometimes they call pre-Halloween slasher movies proto slashers, but I don't. It's a slasher movie. I don't know what it's called. It's the exact same kind of effective body count movie as what comes in the wake of Halloween and Friday the 13th. It's still one of the best ones.
Definitely one of the best. It's one of the best directed slasher films of the 70s, and I will say there's like a bit of a lull, surprisingly, when we first the time between the first victim and the next one. There's a lot of time spent waiting, and I don't mind that, actually, because I like spending time with all these people.
Yeah. But it's they take time to develop the characters. They retain the mood, and that I don't know if you always know that the killer is in the house, but it's I think Black Christmas is one of my favorite horror movies. I think it's hard for me to pick whether that or Deathdream is his best horror film. But I can see the argument for both. But back to back, it's like, if Bob Clark had stayed in that genre, he could have been famous for that. I mean, it's one of the great what ifs. If he had a desire to make more horror films, it just wasn't really. It was just a means to an end to move forward in a profession. And a lot of horror movie directors, like George Romero and Wes Craven, didn't want to get stuck in that genre, but that's what people would, pay them to do. So you don't know if if Bob Clark had not really had an opportunity to break out with Murder by Decree and then Tribute, if he would have made more of these. I don't know, but we're lucky to have.
I'm glad that he did. I'm glad that he made these two back to back, and I certainly found a lot to appreciate. And you can certainly bring up another title, but like I found elements of both Breaking Point and Murder by Decree to be really strong. I don't think they're entirely successful. I don't think there are movies that are stone cold classics. At least, but I mean, again, I'm not as huge into the Sherlock Holmes mythology. I've never watched the Sherlock show that everybody raves about, and I think there are things I'm sure I would appreciate about it more, but I certainly enjoyed myself with both of those other two movies.
Yeah. I forgot to mention Breaking Point, because I that was the nicest surprise, because that was one that had kind of slipped by me until this year. And I agree with you that it's not perfect. I think it kind of just runs like without it kind of doesn't really know how to end itself. Like,
no, the pacing is way off, I think, in that one.
But as a Death Wish knockoff, I think it's pretty good. It has some of the atmosphere that Bob Clark picked up on the horror movies. That's actually the first one. I'd said it was Murder by Decree, but that's actually the first one that's like break from horror. And it's a solid little B movie. I like it a lot for what it is. I wish it was easier for people to see it now. I think the DVD has been out of print for a little while. I don't know if there's any plans to bring it to Blu-ray. But it's a nice surprise if you.
They probably should for the final kill. It's a very memorable final kill,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh man, he's going for it here." That's pretty cool, and the fact that it blows up like a car would when it goes over a cliff, like that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's I think that's the first collaboration with Roger Swaybill, who wrote Porky's with him later on. So it's like that's the first. Yeah, that's I don't know if that's like his red eye, as far as like that kind of tentative dip in the pool of like outside the horror genre proper. But it's like if you get a chance to see it and like like that Charles Bronson kind of vigilante justice kind of thing, it's definitely a nice hidden gem in the filmography of Bob Clark. I mean, there's a lot of films that are not so gem-like, but that was the nice surprise for me.
Yeah, and Murder by Decree is good too. I would say that how things play out, I wasn't as excited about, and certainly when you think of something that's far more playful and involves time travel, like Time After Time, which goes after Jack the Ripper, I definitely prefer that.
Me too. I think Murder by Decree, it feels too long.
It definitely does. Yeah.
The cast is great. It looks great. It has scenes that are fantastic. It's easy to see why people think that's a great film, but I think it's a little plodding. But it's still decent, but it's a nice try. And I think, it's kind of like Match Point with Woody Allen. Like, it's like people, because they hear all those English accents, they think it feels like a lot classier just by default. But it's self-consciously classy. I don't think Bob Clark really, that he was proudly lowbrow, in so much of his work that it feels out of step with everything. And so I don't know if it was just a calculated move to get out of making, slasher and zombie type movies, which, it worked. But, and it was a well thought of film. Like, critics were kind to it. It, did well at the Genies, with the Canadian Oscars. Like, it succeeded in getting him out of exploitation, like horror. But it's fine. I don't want to kind of downplay, but it isn't a it isn't. I wouldn't say it's a great film.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was great either. But I also don't. I don't know why. Like Sherlock Holmes as a character is never really. What was the other? Oh, I must have. It was Billy Wilder. Yeah, that I watched another Sherlock Holmes movie.
Private
I think
Life
it
of
was called
Sherlock
Private
Holmes.
Life. Yeah, and I was just kind of the same thing with that one. I was like, okay, I like a good mystery, but for some reason, maybe there's just a disconnect with me and Sherlock Holmes and James Bond. I don't know why.
Yeah,
It's just neither of them never really like excited me as to follow them along on this.
I like
story,
some of those
but-
Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies, and actually, I like that George C. Scott, Joanne Woodward comedy. They Might Be Giants. That
I should see
yeah,
that.
that's a
Yeah,
fun little movie. But I mean, in general, yeah, I'm kind of with you on the like Sherlock Holmes mysteries are not. Yeah, they're fine, but they're not really my forte either. But and I agree with that. Time After Time is like a wonderful little companion, maybe to put it like that. They would make an interesting kind of contrast double bill, with Murder by Decree. That's a lot more fun, and a great use of Malcolm McDowell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And once we move forward a little bit, though, I mean,
Well,
the two Bob Clark movies that I've seen, from the period that is definitely subpar compared to his work in the 70s were Loose Cannons and It Runs in the Family. And I can't even begin to describe my hate of Loose Cannons. I've done it already. I don't want to do it again.
Yeah, no, Loose Cannons is pretty dire. But I would say just to get to the contemporary, or the more recent films from Bob Clark. But before we get there, I would say that Tribute is one of my favorites of his, and that's a film that is very hard to see currently. I don't really know why. It had a VHS release and then it kind of just vanished. I don't know if it's a rights thing or an Elements thing or what, but that's a Jack Lemmon vehicle. That's the best use of Kim Cattrall of all the Bob Clark movies because they did a couple of films together. Robbie Benson, it's an odd performance. Like it mostly works, but it's one of those father-son, getting, like it's like father is this hammy extrovert, the son is this awkward introvert, and like they have a strange relationship. It's a little schmaltzy in places, but it's also kind of moving and funny, and a great showcase for Jack Lemmon as far as like it's somebody that like can hit notes of like quippy verbal comedy, but also the kind of pathos that he taps into in something like Glengarry Glen Ross or something like that. Like it's all available to him at that point of his career. And it's a little bit of an outlier on Bob Clark's resume because it has some of the I don't want to say like atmospheric, but like it has some of the feel of like his thrillers in terms of the look and pace of it. Like it's not quite as bright and breezy as the post Porky's Bob Clark movies, but it's, I don't know. Again, it's like it's self-consciously a little classier and like almost evoking old Hollywood in a way because of Lemmon. Like it feels like but it's also rooted in theater and plays and like I don't know. It's funny that we bring up the Kaufman thing because they both end similarly as far as like a kind of like a tribute on stage kind of climax. I didn't think of that until just now, but it's again like Breaking Point. Like there's hidden gems on the resume with Bob Clark that are weirdly less talked about than Baby Geniuses or things.
Maybe you can get tribute out on like Warner Archives or Kino Lorber or something.
I don't know. Kino Lorber just put out Murder by Decree, and they mention Breaking Point and Tribute in Bob Clark, and in parentheses they mention those films along with the obvious hits. And so I don't know if they ever had plans to revisit those films, but somebody should, because they are evidence that there was more to Bob Clark than just the horror films and Porky's and Christmas Story. Because I think that those films tend to overshadow so much else. Once you get past Porky's and Christmas Story, then it becomes kind of a rocky road. I mean, and no pun intended, because Rocky, Balboa, Rhinestone. That's the film that I think really made him. Like, critics didn't care for Porky's, or Porky's too, but I think with Rhinestone on, like, the reviews start calling Bob Clark out specifically as like a bad director, and he was a replacement director on that, but that was a thing.
That's
that was a
great.
thing where Stallone was kind of rewriting the script, and it was
And it was
Phil-
one of the original
Phil
screenwriters.
Alden Robinson, who people know from Field of Dreams and Sneakers, and
God, do I love
he wrote-
Sneakers.
and he
So
wrote All of Me, the Lily Tomlin, Steve Martin movie.
another
Yeah,
good one.
but he was mortified with the final result. And Rhinestone is an awkward film. It's watching it again, like to prepare for this, it's just that Stallone is awkward doing like very broad comedy at this point in his career, and so Dolly Parton is appealing. Her songs are not bad in it, and it looks fine. It's shot in scope. Like, it's not top to bottom disaster, but it is kind of an awkward, unfunny comedy. And
I've been curious just to see Stallone sing country music. That's got to be
it's it's awkward. Like, I mean, it's meant to be awkward, but you feel awkward for Sylvester Stallone, the actor. Like, you don't feel awkward for the character. So it's, I don't know. It was a critical and commercial flop, and it's not hard to see why. It's not a secret success, but after that point, he does Turk 182. Did you ever see that with Timothy Hutton?
No, like a lot of the extreme negativity towards everything pretty much from this point forward kind of steered me away. Like, even something like It Runs in the Family, I just, it was like sort of this weird anomaly. It was buried and kind of like lost, and again put out under a different title. And as much as I love A Christmas Story and Gene Shepard and all that stuff, I didn't really actively seek it out, because I just figured, oh God, something happened pretty much from Rhinestone onward. But
yeah, well, and I'm not going to go film by film through the rest of it, but essentially what happens is it's a bunch of comedies, some of them broader than others, and then made for television movies. Again, like a lot of family things, a lot of things that are very sentimental. He had like a kind of a fluke hit in '99 with Baby Geniuses, which I saw it this week for the first time. And
are you okay?
The thing is, with something like that, I might have liked it when I was 7, like, and that's who it's aimed at. So it's like, on the one hand, it's like I didn't like it, but I'm also not who it's made for. So I kind of just observed it. I know that it's like, almost like a punchline, talking about Bob Clark's careers hitting the lows of something like Baby Geniuses. I don't know. I mean, I show it to some children. They might, there's a reason it was a hit. I'm not the audience for that. And that has a good cast too. It has Kathleen Turner in it. It has Kim Cattrall back again. Someone else. Christopher Lloyd. Yeah, like, it has some good actors in it. But it's, I don't know. It's not funny. I don't know. And I haven't seen the sequel to it. So I don't know if Super Baby Geniuses 2 is actually a corrective to anything in it. But yeah, it's a career that kind of winds down. Like, I think the last thing he did was a film called Blonde and Blonder, that he was like kind of in a battle to get his director credit for it at the time that he was tragically killed. Because of
that is unreal what happened. That's so sad.
Yeah, and I don't know if he's the kind of person that would have seen the work reassessed as he grew older, the way someone like John Carpenter, like pretty much every John Carpenter film has a cult following. And granted, John Carpenter had a much more consistent career, but certain titles are going to get reevaluated, like the horror films, like Deathdream and Black Christmas. Christmas Story is going to always stay a beloved family classic, but I don't know if something like Porky's will ever be respectable. It just feels like it's not built for that. But it is interesting, in terms of film history. Like it had this cultural impact. It had this, this impact on film that I thought when you suggested that we do a Bob Clark talk, because of Deathdream, I thought, well, let's at least bring that one up too, because it gets overshadowed by its.
It's definitely worth seeing, and it's worth talking about, especially how the fact that it changed so much, and so many films tried to emulate that. Really, it's like how many of those, I don't know. I should probably just pick up Mike's book and look at all the, the various sex comedies that came out in wake of that film, and some of them I'm sure were more successful than others, and some of them are really eye-rolling for sure, especially the way they portray women. But Porky's definitely surprised me in that, it's not all about like guys oogling women and showing off boobs left and right and stuff, because like that's my interpretation of a sex comedy, really. And then this one, it's like, oh, you know what? There's subtlety. There's things going on. There's a little bit more under the surface, and there's certainly a more humiliation of the guys that is fun to experience. I'd say.
In terms of the sexual politics of it, if you put it aside, put it alongside something like Revenge of the Nerds.
That one didn't.
Porky's will come across as a lot more, rational and politically correct, compared to some of its peers in that field. I mean, I don't know. It's never going to be a reputable subgenre, and most of those films are not great movies. But they have their place in history.
And I will briefly bring up, even though Bob Clark had nothing to do with it, apparently there is, and you can listen to more, certainly if you want to check out Christmas movies actually on the Now Playing Network, Colin Suter and Carrie Finnegan do dissect Christmas Story and Black Christmas further. But they also brought up the fact that there is a Christmas Story 2 direct to DVD sequel that apparently is unwatchable, and it has Daniel Stern, who went on to do the voice of older Kevin Arnold in Wonder Years, of course. Yeah. But this is, I'm never gonna watch it. As much as I love Christmas Story, like, don't ruin it. And I think that's exactly what this film did.
It's one other pop cultural thing that I forgot to mention is that the in the late 70s he also produced a film called Moonrunners that Guy Waldron, the writer producer, did, and that was the template for the Dukes of Hazzard television show. Yes,
I heard about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and that was a big part of my childhood. The it was the Dukes of Hazzard. So Bob Clark was not the creator on that. I think he wrote maybe a script and then like a TV movie tie-in. But I think when they did that big budget remake a few years back, he was one of the people that saw a big payday when they sued the studio for like some kind of credit that they didn't initially get. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Well, Bill, we've reached the end where we reveal our top 3 picks from the director. So if you're ready, you can reveal to the world your love of the Karate Dog right here. I could,
but I'll just go with 3 tribute, 2 Deathdream, 1 Black Christmas.
Oh, okay. I'll go with 3 A Christmas Story, 2 Black Christmas, and 1 Deathdream.
So that's pretty close.
But yeah, 1 and 2 is you're right. 1 and 2 almost
they're
like
for me.
The moment I'm watching.
Yeah.
The moment I'm watching them, they're my favorite.
Yeah, I don't really rank one that like higher than the other, but for the sake of giving you a list, those are I'll go with that one.
Yeah, and I'll definitely catch up with Tribute. Thank you. So, what's going on with you in the world of supporting characters? Where can people find you? All that good stuff.
My show is supporting characters that you can get. You can find it at www.nowplayingnetwork.net, and you can find it on iTunes and Spotify and all those places. The next episode will be with Gary Tews, who has the DVD Beaver review website. But all my back episodes, you can find that location. And then the home video stuff I'm working on, if I want to plug anything, I think the only thing I can say is that Puzzle of a Downfall Child, the Jerry Schatzberg movie, is coming out through Kino Lorber, I think in November. And I'm on the commentary for that with Daniel Kramer, the filmmaker. And some other stuff coming up that isn't announced yet. But so that's what I'm working on.
Terrific. Yeah. All right. Well, our next episode, of course, is going to be all horror related this time. We got Lucio Fulci featuring Gabe Powers and Patrick Rapole, a director that I've only seen 2 films of that everybody seems to love, as far as I know, and I'm excited to catch up with more. Actually, I've seen 3 movies now. Now that I've seen the Lizard in a Woman's Skin, which I loved.
It's a great movie.
So there's a lot to look forward to in that conversation. I don't know how we'll cover it all. I think we're going to focus on probably The Beyond and Lizard in a Woman's Skin, but I think it's going to be one of those conversations similar to us where we try to tackle as much as possible. And they're both very knowledgeable about Fulci, so I'm not too worried, but I'm going to see as much as I can between now and then. So please just go to directorsclubpodcast.com as well as the nowplayingnetwork.net, and you can follow me on Letterboxd over at nowplayingjim and Twitter at nowplayingjim. Once again, thank you so much, Bill, for being on the show. It's always a pleasure and a blast to have you on. We'll do it again very soon, I'm sure.
Having me back. This is fun.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you soon in about a month for the Lucio Fulci episode. Goodbye.
Not a finger!